Hey there, tonight we're uncovering why life as a medieval serf was less fairy tale and more fight for survival, as we delve into the surprising truth of their daily battles with harsh realities that Hollywood often ignores. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. If you were the average medieval serf, your alarm clock was probably a rooster, and your first thought upon waking was likely a mix of dread and resignation. The rooster's crow didn't mean hitting the snooze button. It meant another grueling day of work lay ahead. Forget about rolling out of your memory foam mattress. If you were lucky, you'd have a straw-stuffed sack to call a bed. Welcome to the medieval world, where the peasantry was less about frolicking in meadows and more about surviving to see another sunrise. The life of a serf was the medieval social ladder's basement, and they were practically glued to the spot. Serfs weren't slaves per se, but they were tied to the land like a clingy ex. Legally, they were bound to the lord's estate, laboring on his land for most of their waking hours. The day began at the crack of dawn and didn't end until the sky was painted with stars. It was a relentless cycle of planting, ploughing, and harvesting, with just enough time to catch your breath before starting again. A serf's home was a cozy affair, if by cozy you mean cramped and dimly lit. Imagine a single-room hut made of wattle and daub, essentially a medieval version of drywall, except far less durable and definitely not soundproof. The roof was thatched, which was great for keeping out rain, but also a five-star hotel for rats. A single hearth provided warmth, cooking space, and a constant reminder that fire safety was a concept centuries away from being invented. Now, you might think, at least they had Sundays off for a bit of rest and relaxation. Well, not quite. Sundays were reserved for attending church, which was less about spiritual enlightenment and more about not getting excommunicated. The church was the medieval equivalent of your internet provider, ubiquitous and unavoidable, with fees that always seemed to pop up unexpectedly. Speaking of fees, the economic reality of serfdom was as bleak as a rainy medieval winter. Taxes were omnipresent, and the serfs' pockets were perpetually empty. First up was the tithe, a delightful 10% of everything you produced, handed over to the church because salvation, apparently, wasn't free. Then there were the feudal dues, which were essentially taxes paid to your lord for the privilege of being his serf. These could be paid in produce, livestock, or labor, resulting in a barter system that was less thriving economy and more barely getting by. But wait, there's more. Enter the Heriot, the medieval version of a loyalty program, except it was more of a death tax. When a serf died, their family had to fork over the best animal they owned to the lord. It was like a cruel game show where the departing contestant's family had to pay for the privilege of losing. The Heriot was a stark reminder that even in death, the lord had the final say. All this paints a picture of an existence that was as exhausting as it was thankless. The romanticized vision of medieval life as a bucolic existence in harmony with nature conveniently glosses over the relentless toil that defined a serf's life. The reality was a constant battle against hunger, disease, and the whims of the weather, with the occasional peasant uprising thrown in for good measure. As for career advancement, forget about it. Upward mobility for a serf was about as likely as finding a unicorn grazing in your backyard. Your life was set from birth, and unless you fancied a career change to a monk or nun, both of which required a divine calling and some serious connections, you were stuck tilling the soil until your dying day. The notion of home sweet home had a different ring to it when your house could be repossessed if you fell out of favor with the lord. In an era without tenant rights, eviction was as simple as a decree from the manor, leaving you with nothing but the clothes on your back and a grim sense of déjà vu. So why didn't serfs just up and leave? 2 words, legal restrictions. Serfs were bound to their lord's land and couldn't lawfully leave without permission. It was a catch-22 of medieval proportions. You couldn't leave to find a better life because you were stuck in the life you couldn't leave. The land was their prison, and the bars were made of legal codes and social norms that were as unyielding as they were ancient. But hey, at least serfs had community, right? Well, yes and no. The village was a tight-knit community not by choice, but by necessity. Survival depended on cooperation, shared resources, and the occasional communal feast to lift spirits. But if you think that meant everyone got along swimmingly, think again. Disputes over land, livestock, and the occasional accusation of witchcraft could turn neighbors into rivals faster than you could say, trial by ordeal. And let's not forget the Black Death, the ultimate party crasher of the 14th century. When the plague hit, it didn't discriminate between lord and serf, but it did make the serf's life even more precarious. Fields went untended, labor shortages arose, and the social order wobbled like a poorly stacked pile of firewood. Yet, in a strange twist of fate, the aftermath of the plague offered serfs a rare moment of leverage. With fewer workers available, those who survived could demand better terms and conditions, albeit temporarily. In the end, the life of a medieval serf was a masterclass in endurance. They were the unsung backbone of the feudal system, laboring in obscurity and hardship. Their existence was a testament to human resilience in the face of overwhelming odds, a reminder that even when life is a relentless grind, there's a certain grim satisfaction in simply making it through another day. So, the next time you find yourself complaining about your job or the state of your apartment, spare a thought for the medieval serf. It may not make your problems disappear, but it might just make that morning commute feel a little less daunting. After all, at least you don't have to pay someone for the privilege of dying. Sure, life for medieval serfs was a masterclass in endurance, but what kept this grueling system ticking like a medieval clock with a missing gear? Enter the feudal system, a grand social hierarchy that was less about climbing a ladder and more about staying put on the mudslide of medieval life. Picture it as the historical equivalent of a multi-level marketing scheme, minus the Instagram influencers. At its core, feudalism was about land, loyalty, and a whole lot of ploughing. At the top of this medieval pyramid sat the king, who theoretically owned all the land. But because managing real estate was as exhausting then as it is now, the king parceled out chunks to his trusty nobles. These nobles, in turn, parceled out even smaller chunks to knights or barons, who then tossed what was left to the serfs. The serfs were the base of this pyramid, holding it all together with little more than sweat and a prayer. The whole setup was like a game of Jenga, where removing even one block could cause the entire thing to come crashing down, and guess who got squished? Spoiler, it wasn't the guy with a crown. This system of land and loyalty was cemented by a series of unwritten social contracts. The lord provided protection and a small plot of land for a serf to work, and in return, the serf owed labor and a chunk of their produce. It sounds simple enough until you realize that this protection was often as effective as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. Lords were more concerned about collecting dues than defending their serfs from roving bandits or worse, the tax collector. Taxes. If you thought the IRS was bad, medieval times had their own version, multiplied by 3. Besides the church's tithe and the lord's feudal dues, there was the gleefully named tallage, essentially a tax levied at the whim of the manor lord to cover unexpected expenses like a new moat or a particularly lavish feast. The serfs' wallets, or rather, their burlap sacks, were perpetually empty, with every spare coin earmarked for someone else's coffers. In this economy, upward mobility was about as likely as a pig sprouting wings and flying off to the next county. Speaking of counties, let's not forget the role of the church, the medieval powerhouse that could make or break a serf's life with the flick of a bishop's crozier. The church was both a source of solace and a tool of social control. It promised salvation and an afterlife that, fingers crossed, didn't involve tilling fields, but with promises came strings attached. The church had a hand in nearly every aspect of life, births, marriages, deaths, and everything in between. If you didn't toe the ecclesiastical line, you risked excommunication, a fate worse than death for many, as it meant being cut off from the community and, more importantly, from the path to heaven. And here's the kicker. The church was a master of propaganda. They painted the serfs' suffering as a divine test, a temporary trial before the eternal bliss of the afterlife. This narrative kept serfs in line, believing that their place in the social order was not just inevitable, but divinely ordained. It's like telling someone stuck on the treadmill of life that the real marathon is in heaven, so just keep running. Now, let's tackle the myth of the noble peasant, a romanticized image that has somehow survived into modern times. You know the type, cheerful, rosy-cheeked folk living in picturesque hamlets, singing as they sow the fields. In reality, life was often brutally harsh. Illnesses were rampant, diets were meager, and leisure was as rare as a solar eclipse. The notion of the happy peasant was more a fairy tale than a reality, a narrative spun by those who never had to wipe the sweat from their brow after a 12-hour day in the fields. The idea of a noble peasant was convenient for those at the top. It painted a picture of contentment and simplicity, masking the exploitation and hardship that were the daily bread of the common folk. But don't take my word for it. Take a look at the records. Chroniclers of the time, who were often clergy themselves, had little reason to sugarcoat the harsh realities of serfdom. Accounts describe a life where every day was a struggle, where the idea of freedom was as foreign as a distant land across the sea. So, if you're ever tempted to romanticize the Middle Ages, remember that the reality was far less about chivalrous knights and fair maidens, and more about grinding toil and relentless hardship. The serfs were the unsung heroes of the time, the ones who kept the wheels of the medieval machine turning even as they were ground beneath it. Stay tuned, because next we'll dive deeper into the social structures, exploring the role of knights and how their chivalry was often more about contracts than courtesy. We'll also peek into the world of medieval justice, where the law was as flexible as a medieval sword, sharp, unpredictable, and often wielded by those with the most power. So, while knights were busy jousting and practicing chivalry, which, let's be honest, was often more about who in the medieval social club than actual courtesy, serfs were knee-deep in the mud, wrestling with Mother Nature herself. And when it came to the whims of the weather, the serfs weren't just dealing with a capricious beast. They were up against a full-blown medieval climate crisis. Enter the Great Famine of 1315-1317, a time when it rained so incessantly that folks might have considered building arks if only they had the time or resources. Picture this, 3 years of relentless rain, turning fertile fields into soggy swamps. Crops rotted in the ground, and grain supplies dwindled faster than a medieval dance craze. The rain was so persistent that chroniclers of the time probably needed oars instead of quills to write about it. When the skies finally cleared, the resulting famine left an indelible mark on Europe, one that wasn't soon forgotten. From 1315 to 1317, Europe was drenched in misery, with food shortages leading to skyrocketing prices. Wheat prices, for instance, tripled making bread, a staple of the medieval diet, more of a luxury than a given. The famine was like a cruel game of musical chairs where the music never stopped, and the chairs were made of edible food. People resorted to desperate measures, eating whatever they could find, from dogs to horses, and in some cases, even each other. Yep, cannibalism wasn't just a tall tale for the faint-hearted. It was a grim reality for some. Now, let's talk about how this affected agricultural productivity. In a world where 90% of the population relied on agriculture, a bad harvest wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a potential death sentence. A single bad season could tip the scales from subsistence to starvation. While modern agriculture can absorb a few poor harvests thanks to global trade, medieval farmers didn't have the luxury of importing quinoa from the New World. A bad harvest meant empty bellies and often empty grave. The famine also exposed the economic fragility of the feudal system. Lords, who relied on their serfs for produce and dues, found themselves in a bind. They couldn't squeeze blood from a stone, and with their serfs too hungry or too dead to work, the lord's coffers took a hit. It was a harsh reminder that the feudal economy was only as strong as the weakest harvest. If the Great Famine was a wake-up call, then the Black Death was the alarm bell that no one could snooze. The plague swept through Europe in the mid-14th century like a medieval freight train, leaving devastation in its wake. Over just a few years, from 1347 to 1351, it killed an estimated 25 million people, roughly a third of Europe's population. It was a catastrophe of epic proportions, the kind of event that makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about life and death. But here's the twist. The Black Death, while undeniably horrific, paradoxically offered a silver lining for the surviving serfs. With fewer people left to work the land, labor suddenly became a scarce commodity. The laws of supply and demand kicked in, and the remaining serfs found themselves in a rare position of leverage. Picture it. For once, they could name their price, and lords, desperate to keep their estates running, had to listen. This newfound bargaining power led to some unexpected social shifts. Wages increased, and serfs started to demand, and often receive, better working conditions. In some areas, serfs even managed to negotiate their way out of serfdom altogether. It was the medieval equivalent of a workers' revolution, minus the hashtags and protest signs. The Black Death had shaken the foundations of feudalism, forcing a new era of labor relations that no one saw coming. Of course, the lords didn't take this lying down. Attempts to legislate wage controls were made, like the infamous Statute of Labourers in 1351, which tried to cap wages and tie workers to their lords once again. But the genie had been let out of the bottle, and the old ways couldn't be so easily reinstated. The plague had permanently altered the social contract, setting the stage for centuries of change. So while serfs still faced the unyielding challenges of medieval life, from fickle weather to feudal overlords, the post-plague world offered them an unprecedented opportunity to reshape their destinies, if only a little. It was a rare moment when the downtrodden could look up and see a glimmer of hope, albeit through the haze of loss and uncertainty. And with that, we leave our serfs temporarily empowered, yet still caught in the relentless gears of history. But don't worry, there's more to come. Next up, we'll delve into the intricacies of medieval justice, a system where fairness was often as rare as a sunny day during the Great Famine. Stay tuned, because the ride is far from over. So, while the feudal lords were busy drafting laws that tried to rewind the clock to pre-plague times, the serfs had other ideas. Enter the age of resistance, where serfs proved they weren't just passive passengers on the medieval misery train. These folks had spunk, grit, and a knack for creative defiance that could make any modern protest movement take notes. Let's kick things off with the low-key acts of rebellion, the ones that might not make the history books, but certainly made their mark. Imagine this: you're a serf, and you've had enough of your lord's demands. What do? You start by working just a tad slower, like you're moving through molasses. Not enough to get caught, but enough to make a point. It's the medieval equivalent of quiet quitting, and it was surprisingly effective. When labor is scarce and every pair of hands counts, a slow day in the fields could ripple through the entire estate. Then there were the oops, did I do that? Moments of sabotage. Accidentally letting the livestock escape or misplacing a tool might seem minor, but in a world where every resource was precious, these small acts of defiance could cause a headache for the lord. Picture livestock wandering off into the sunset while the serf shrugs innocently, knowing full well that every lost sheep is a direct hit to the manor's bottom line. But sometimes, subtlety wasn't enough. Enter the full-blown revolts, the rock concerts of medieval rebellion. One of the most famous was the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, a spectacular uprising that shook England to its core. What kicked it off? A little thing called the poll tax. The government, needing funds for a seemingly endless war with France, decided to tax every adult, regardless of income. It was like charging everyone the same cover fee to enter a club, whether you're a high roller or barely scraping by. The revolt spread like wildfire. Led by figures like Wat Tyler and Jack Straw, the rebels marched on London, demanding an end to serfdom and a rollback of oppressive taxes. They weren't just angry peasants, they were a political force, organized and with a clear agenda. Even the Archbishop of Canterbury, Simon Sudbury, found himself on the wrong end of a sharp axe. Talk about making a statement. But here's the kicker. Like many revolts, it ended with more heads on pikes than actual change. King Richard II, a mere teenager at the time, placated the rebels with promises of reform, only to then crush the uprising with brutal efficiency. Once the dust settled, the poll tax was repealed, but the old system of serfdom largely went back to business as usual. It was a classic case of one step forward, two steps back, a lesson in the harsh realities of challenging the status quo. Now, before you think the serfs walked away empty-handed, there were some small victories. The revolt did send shockwaves through the ruling classes, making them acutely aware of the potential for unrest. It was a wake-up call that maybe, just maybe, pushing the peasantry too far wasn't the best long-term strategy. The seeds of change had been planted, even if they took centuries to fully bloom. And let's not overlook the power of community. While the lords and kings held the legal power, the serfs had something equally potent: numbers and solidarity. In a world where survival often hinged on cooperation, the sense of community among serfs was their secret weapon. When one village rose up, others followed, creating a network of resistance that couldn't be easily dismantled. In the end, serf resistance wasn't just about the grand gestures. It was about daily acts of courage and defiance, the small rebellions that chipped away at a system designed to keep them down. Whether through quiet acts of sabotage or full-scale revolts, the serfs proved they weren't just passive players in their own stories. They were active participants, pushing back against a system that seemed as immovable as a medieval castle wall. So, while the lords and ladies fretted over their dwindling coffers and ever-shifting power dynamics, the serfs were busy rewriting their own narratives. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a testament to their resilience and tenacity. And that's something worth remembering the next time we find ourselves grappling with our own modern-day challenges. After all, if the serfs could find ways to resist, maybe there's hope for us yet. Stay tuned, because the story isn't over. Next up, we'll take a closer look at the precarious world of medieval justice, a place where fairness was often as elusive as a unicorn. Keep your wits about you. It's a bumpy ride. So, as the serfs quietly crafted their own tales of resistance in the shadow of medieval justice, the world around them was undergoing a seismic shift. The medieval landscape was like a board game where the pieces had started to move on their own, challenging the rules that had kept them in check for centuries. Enter the decline of serfdom, a slow but steady dismantling of the feudal system, driven by forces that even the most ironclad lords couldn't control. It all started with the rise of towns and trade. Picture bustling market squares sprouting up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, drawing people like magnets. By the 12th century, these urban beehives were the medieval version of a startup boom, offering serfs a tantalizing glimpse of life beyond the lord's fields. Suddenly, a world that once seemed as narrow as a knight's visor was expanding into something as vast and unpredictable as the open sea. Town charters, those magical documents of self-governance, were the golden tickets for serfs seeking freedom. If you managed to sneak off to a town and blend in for a year and a day, you were free. It was medieval hide-and-seek, with your freedom as the prize. These towns were more than just economic hubs. They were the engines of social change. Merchants, those daring rogues of the marketplace, were rewriting the script. They needed goods, and they needed people to move them. This meant opportunities for serfs to trade their plows for a chance at something new. The old barter economy was giving way to cold, hard cash, and serfs who were savvy enough, or lucky enough, found themselves with new skills and a new sense of independence. Meanwhile, the lords were having a bit of an identity crisis. Their lands, once the source of all wealth, were now like old tech that couldn't keep up with the latest trends. They needed cash, not just bushels of wheat or a couple of scrawny chickens. Wars, those perennial money pits, drained their coffers faster than a leaky medieval roof. To fund their grandiose campaigns and keep up appearances, they were forced to lease land, sell charters, or gasp, hire mercenaries. It was like finding out your posh neighbour was renting out his mansion on Airb. This shift from labour to cash didn't happen overnight, but it was relentless, like the tide eroding a sandcastle. As the need for money grew, lords found themselves more willing, or perhaps more desperate, to negotiate with their serfs. Contracts began to replace obligations. Suddenly, a serf could pay a fee and essentially buy their way out of bondage, transforming from a tenant to a tenant farmer. It was the medieval version of a get-out-of-jail-free card, albeit with a hefty price tag. But let's not get too carried away with the notion of a serf utopia. The transition was rocky, full of false starts and backsliding. Lords didn't just hand over freedom like party favors. They resisted, clinging to their ancient rights with the tenacity of a cat holding onto the last scrap of chicken. Yet the writing was on the wall, or perhaps more fittingly, in the dwindling lines of serfs at the manor fields. The once unchallengeable feudal order was starting to look more like a relic than a reality. Now, let's talk legacy. Serfdom, for all its oppressiveness, was the unsung scaffolding for the modern world. The toil of countless serfs laid the groundwork, quite literally, for the towns, trade routes and industries that eventually defined Europe. Their sweat and labour were the hidden gears that turned the medieval machine, setting the stage for the Renaissance and the explosion of ideas and commerce that followed. In a twist of historical irony, the very system that sought to keep them downtrodden inadvertently paved the way for progress. And what about the lessons for today? Well, the echoes of serfdom can still be heard in modern labour dynamics. The struggle for fair wages, the fight for workers' rights, the push against exploitation, these are not new battles. They are the same age-old conflicts dressed in new clothes, reminding us that history is not just about dates and events, but about people striving against the odds. The serfs of the past whisper to us through time, urging us to remember that change is possible, even when the deck seems stacked against us. So, as you mull over the medieval tapestry of serfdom, remember that every field tilled, every tax paid, every quiet act of defiance contributed to a broader narrative, a narrative that continues to unfold today. Serfs may have been the underdogs, the forgotten cogs in the wheel, but their legacy is woven into the very fabric of our society. It's a legacy of resilience, ingenuity, and the unyielding human spirit. As we wrap up our medieval journey, take a moment to appreciate the serf story, a story of hardship and hope, of a world that seems distant yet so strikingly familiar. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that the past is never really gone. It's alive in the lessons we learn, the battles we fight, and the world we continue to shape. Keep that in mind the next time you feel like a small cog in a big machine. History shows us that even the smallest wheels can set great things in motion. The rooster's crow is your alarm clock, and let's be honest, it's not the most pleasant way to wake up. It's the crack of dawn in medieval Europe, and you're about to start a day in the life of a mason, a day that would make a modern 9-to-5er clutch their ergonomic chair in horror. Your workday kicks off way before the sun. S had its coffee around 5. 0 a.m. This is the Middle Ages, after all, where daylight is your only source of illumination. Forget about those sleek LED desk lamps. Here you rely on the fickle glow of the rising sun to light your workspace. Your first task, a quick breakfast of bread and ale. Yes, ale, because water could be as lethal as a Game of Thrones wedding. Now, let's talk tools. Your medieval toolbox is about as basic as it gets. We're talking chisels, mallets, and measuring rods, none of which are battery-powered or Bluetooth-enabled. It's just you, your hands, and a lot of elbow grease. The chisel, your main tool, is a far cry from the precision instruments of today. It's a simple iron tool, and you've got to sharpen it yourself, usually with a whetstone that's seen better days. And the mallet, it's essentially a chunk of wood. Forget about pneumatic drills or laser levels. Your tools are more Fred Flintstone than Bob the Builder. The work itself is nothing short of grueling. You're tasked with shaping stones that can weigh as much as a small car. And you thought your CrossFit class was tough. The goal is to transform these massive blocks into the building materials of cathedrals, castles, or fortresses that could withstand the odd siege or two. Talk about pressure. These constructions are not just about aesthetics, they're about survival. The walls you help build are meant to keep invaders out, to protect the community, to symbolize the power and piety of whoever commissioned them. Your shift stretches from sunup to sundown, roughly 12 hours of back-breaking labor. Compare that to the modern 8-hour workday, which is practically a spa day in comparison. And let's not even start on weekends. They're not a thing yet. For you, Sunday is for church, not brunch. And paid vacation. The only vacation you get is when you're injured or sick, which is more likely than you'd like, given the hazards of the job. Stone dust irritates your lungs, the heavy lifting strains your back, and one wrong move with a chisel could cost you a finger, or worse. Despite all this, the image of masons as master craftsmen persists. The romantic notion of the mason as an artist in stone, a creator of grand cathedrals like Notre Dame, is appealing but mostly myth. Sure, some masons achieve fame and fortune, but the vast majority are just trying to make ends meet, earning pennies a day. In 1300s England, for example, a skilled mason might earn 6 pence a day. To put that in perspective, you'd need about 100 pence to buy a single sheep. So you're not exactly rolling in wool. And yet there's a certain pride in your work. You're part of something bigger, something that will outlast you by centuries. You're creating a legacy in stone, and that's not something to be taken lightly. Even if your name isn't etched in history, your work will be. Those massive cathedrals and looming fortresses stand testament to your labor long after you're gone. While the reality of your day-to-day might be less glamorous than the Hollywood version, there's no denying the importance of what you're doing. Masons are the backbone of medieval construction, turning raw stone into the architectural wonders that define an era. It's exhausting, it's dirty, and it's dangerous, but it's also essential. And as you lay down your chisel at the end of another long day, you can at least take solace in the fact that tomorrow you get to do it all over again. The joys of medieval life. As you lay down your chisel at the end of another long day, you might wonder why you're still doing it. Well, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of what keeps you and your fellow masons showing up day after day. The financial side of medieval masonry. Spoiler alert, it's not exactly a high-roller lifestyle. Being a mason in the Middle Ages is like being the gig worker of your time. You're paid by the day, and that's if the weather cooperates and the worksite is up and running. A skilled mason in 1300s England might earn about 6 pence a day. Sounds quaint, right? But let's put that into perspective. A single loaf of bread costs about a halfpenny, and you're not eating just bread. You've got to factor in ale because, you know, medieval hydration goals. Now, let's talk about the cost of living. Imagine trying to save up for a sheep, which would set you back around 100 pence. That's like the medieval version of a down payment for a compact car. Housing is another story. You're likely renting a small, drafty cottage, where the concept of central heating is as foreign as flying cars. Rent could easily consume a quarter of your monthly earnings. Here's a fun twist. The economic pressures you face are as volatile as a Game of Thrones plotline. Enter the Black Death, the pandemic that's as medieval as it gets. It sweeps through Europe in the 14th century, wiping out an estimated 25 million people, about a third of the continent's population. Suddenly, the demand for labor skyrockets. Fewer workers mean higher wages for those who survive. It's a grim silver lining, but hey, you take what you can get. But wait, there's more. Political landscapes are shifting faster than the latest TikTok trend. Wars, like the 100 Years' War, are waging, and the feudal system is feeling the strain. Lords and kings need fortresses and castles, and you, dear Mason, are caught in the crossfire of their ambitions. Your job security is about as stable as a reality TV star's marriage. One day you're building a castle. The next, you're wondering if there's enough work to pay for that pint of ale. Now, let's get into the materials. Stone doesn't just appear magically on the worksite. It's quarried, transporting, and shaped, all of which costs money. The good stuff, like limestone and sandstone, is sourced from specific regions. For instance, if you're working on a cathedral in York, the stone might come from the quarries of Tadcaster, a good 10 miles away. Transport is a logistical nightmare involving carts, oxen, and a lot of muscle. Each piece you painstakingly shape has already traveled a small marathon to reach you. Add to this the cost of iron for your chisels, which, let's face it, wear out faster than your patience on a Monday morning. Iron isn't cheap, and neither is the whetstone you need to keep your tools sharp. It's a constant cycle of scrimping to replace what's broken or lost, all while hoping the next plague doesn't put you out of work. Despite the financial juggling act, there's something to be said for the pride in your craft. You're a part of a guild, a fraternity of sorts, which offers a semblance of community and protection. Guilds regulate wages and ensure you're not working for peanuts, or, in your case, breadcrumbs. They also provide a network of support, which is crucial when the political winds shift or a rival mason tries to undercut your work. So, while the romantic image of the mason as a revered artisan is more myth than reality, there's no denying the importance of your role. You're not just building structures, you're shaping history, one stone at a time. And as you look up at the towering walls of a cathedral or the formidable ramparts of a castle, you know you've left your mark, literally and figuratively. In the end, the life of a medieval mason is a constant balancing act between survival and legacy. You're not just a cog in the machine. You're an integral part of the medieval world's grand design. As you prepare to do it all over again tomorrow, remember that even if your name isn't known, your work will echo through the ages, long after the dust of history has settled. So, as the dust of history continues to settle, let's talk about where you, the medieval mason, fit in this grand societal puzzle. Spoiler alert, you're not exactly at the top of the pecking order, but hey, you're not at the bottom either. Think of it as being the middle child in a family of feudal chaos. You're squeezed between the nobility who commission your work and the labourers who, let's be honest, probably never even heard of you. In the medieval social hierarchy, masons occupy a unique niche. You're not a lowly serf, tethered to the land and at the mercy of the local lord. No, you've got a skill, a highly valued one at that. You're like the IT specialist of the Middle Ages, except instead of fixing bugs, you're chipping away at chunks of limestone. This skill set allows for a modicum of social mobility, a rare and precious commodity in an age when your birth largely dictated your fate. Now, let's focus on the guilds, those medieval powerhouses that are as crucial to your life as Wi-Fi is to a modern teenager. Guilds are like the medieval version of LinkedIn, but with fewer spam messages and more actual support. They are your professional network, your trade union, and your regulatory body all rolled into one. Without them, you'd be adrift in a sea of competitive masons, vying for the same jobs and often getting shortchanged by opportunistic patrons. The guilds ensure that you stick to a standard wage, preventing some sneaky bugger from undercutting everyone else and driving wages down to the level of a medieval minnow. By regulating prices and quality, they maintain the reputation of the craft. If your work doesn't measure up, you might have to answer to the guild. And trust me, you don't want to be at the receiving end of a medieval performance review. Your livelihood depends on your reputation, and a black mark from the guild is like a 1-star Yelp review that never goes away. Guilds also provide a form of social security. In a world without health insurance or workers' comp, they offer assistance to members who fall on hard times. Break a leg on the job or come down with a nasty bout of plague, and the guild might help support your family while you recover, or, while you don't. It's a rough world, but at least you've got some semblance of a safety net. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of guild camaraderie. The reality is, these organizations can be as cutthroat as a Game of Thrones episode. Entry into a guild isn't just a matter of signing up, it's a rigorous process. You start as an apprentice, usually around the tender age of 12, learning the trade from a master mason. This apprenticeship can last up to 7 years, during which you live with the master, eat their food, and work like a dog. Only after proving your chops do you graduate to the rank of journeyman, finally able to earn wages for your work. And if you're really exceptional and maybe a bit lucky, you might someday become a master yourself, able to take on apprentices of your own. As for social mobility, it's a mixed bag. Sure, a talented mason might climb the ladder and gain a certain degree of wealth and status. But let's not kid ourselves. There's a ceiling. You're not going to become a lord or a king. This isn't a Cinderella story. It's more like a gritty reboot where everyone's still wearing the same shoes. The camaraderie among masons is a real thing, though. When you spend 12-hour days chiseling stone next to the same group of guys, a bond is forged that's as solid as the mortar binding your bricks. You share meals, jokes, and the occasional gripe about the foreman. It's a brotherhood built on shared labor and mutual respect, not unlike the camaraderie found in modern workplaces, minus the air conditioning and casual Fridays. Despite the hardships, there's something deeply satisfying about knowing you're part of a tradition that dates back to antiquity. You and your fellow masons are the unsung heroes of medieval society, providing the literal building blocks for the cathedrals, castles, and fortresses that define an era. Your work is part of a legacy that transcends time, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. So, as you lay down your tools for the day and head back to your modest dwelling, you might reflect on the role you play in this intricate medieval tapestry. You're not a noble, nor are you a peasant. You're somewhere in between, carving out a life of dignity and purpose, one stone at a time. And that, dear mason, is something worth chipping away for day after day. So, as you lay down your tools for the day and head back to your modest dwelling, let's dive into the grand scheme of things, literally. The stone structures you're helping to build aren't just architectural marvels. They're political and religious statements chiseled into the skyline. Cathedrals and castles are the skyscrapers of the medieval world, towering symbols of power and faith. And whether you like it or not, you're smack dab in the middle of this medieval Game of Thrones. Let's start with cathedrals, those majestic, heaven-reaching edifices that make even the most stalwart atheist pause. Designed to awe and inspire, these buildings are like the medieval equivalent of a TED talk on steroids, showcasing the wealth and piety of the church. Take Chartres Cathedral in France, for example. This Gothic masterpiece, with its stunning stained glass and flying buttresses, didn't just pop up overnight. It was the result of decades of labor, sweat, and let's be real, a fair bit of political maneuvering. Built between 1194 and 1220, it's a testament to the church's influence and the mason's craftsmanship. But here's the kicker. The labourers who built these heavenly halls often lived in earthly squalor, their toil exploited in service of divine grandeur. You see, the church was a medieval powerhouse, the spiritual Google of its time. It dictated not just religious life, but social and political as well, wielding influence that would make any CEO today green with envy. And cathedrals, they were the ultimate status symbols, each one a massive stone hashtag proclaiming the church's dominance. But while the bishops and clergy basked in the glory of these monumental structures, the masons and workers remained largely anonymous, their contributions swallowed by the grandeur of the edifice itself. Now, on the flip side of the ecclesiastical coin, we have castles. Ah, castles, those fairy tale fortresses that conjure images of dashing knights and imperiled damsels. But don't get too swept away by the romance. These stone behemoths were as much about power as they were about protection. Built to withstand sieges and project authority, castles were the medieval equivalent of a do not disturb sign on a massive scale. Think of them as the ultimate flex, because when you're a feudal lord, nothing says I'm the boss, quite like a moat and a drawbridge. Take the Tower of London, for instance. Originally constructed by William the Conqueror in the 1070s, it wasn't just a royal residence. It was a symbol of Norman power over a conquered England. The masons who worked on it were part of a grand narrative, one that told the story of conquest and control. Yet, for the noble class, These structures were more than just fortifications. They were statements, declarations in stone of who wielded power and who didn't. And guess who was caught in the middle of this feudal arms race? Yep, you guessed it, the Masons. Masons were the unsung architects of these grand stories, yet they were also pawns in a larger, often brutal, game. Imagine being a skilled artisan, your work revered, yet your role as replaceable as a piece in a chess set. This duality was the Masons' reality. Their labor both exalted and exploited, a paradox as enduring as the stone they carved. And speaking of duality, it's time to debunk another myth, the notion that Masons saw themselves as nothing more than laborers. Primary sources tell a different tale. While the elite might have viewed Masons as mere cogs in the architectural machine, Masons themselves took immense pride in their craft. The Regius manuscript, dating back to 1390, offers a glimpse into the world of medieval masonry. It's essentially a rulebook, laying out the duties of a mason with all the solemnity of a medieval LinkedIn page. Yet it also reveals the pride Masons took in their work, positioning them not just as laborers, but as keepers of a sacred craft. It's a reminder that while Masons might have been exploited, they were far from mindless drones. They saw their work as a vocation, a calling that transcended the mundane drudgery of daily toil. So, where does this leave you, the medieval Mason, in the grand tapestry of history? You're a craftsman caught in the crossfire of religious ambition and political power, your work revered, yet your identity often obscured by the shadows of your own creations. But don't let the lofty ambitions of the elite fool you. The true legacy of your labor is written in stone, not in the annals of noble deeds. As you lay down your tools each day, remember that while the castles and cathedrals stand as monuments to the ambitions of the powerful, they're also testaments to your skill and resilience. You're shaping history, one chisel stroke at a time, leaving a mark that will endure long after the political and religious tides have shifted. In the end, you're not just building structures. You're crafting the very narrative of the medieval world, one stone at a time. And as we set the stage for the final act of this medieval saga, let's keep our eyes peeled on how these structures, and the Masons who built them, fit into the broader socio-political landscape. Because while the stones may be set, the story is far from over. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover in the world of medieval masonry, where every block has a tale to tell. So, as we delve into the enduring legacy of medieval masons, let's take a moment to consider the grand structures that have outlasted empires, revolutions, and quite a few fashion faux pas. Walk into any European city, and you're likely to find yourself dwarfed by the towering cathedrals and castles that stand as testaments to a bygone era. These are not just buildings. They're the surviving chapters of a story that began centuries ago, painstakingly carved by hands long since turned to dust. Take the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, for instance. Constructed over almost 200 years, beginning in the 12th century, it's a Gothic marvel that has witnessed everything from coronations to revolutions. But here's the kicker. For all its grandeur, the masons who labored over its intricate stonework weren't exactly sipping champagne on completion. Nope, they were more likely to be found nursing sore backs and counting the meager coins they earned for each grueling day's work. The myth of the master mason as a revered artist, relishing in the glory of their creations. That's more fiction than fact, my friend. Now, let's debunk the myth of medieval architecture as a golden age of artistic freedom. The truth. Masons were more akin to construction workers than free-spirited artists. Don't get me wrong. They had skill and creativity in spades, but the medieval building site was more about execution than expression. You worked to a plan, usually drafted by someone higher up the feudal food chain, and deviation wasn't exactly encouraged. Imagine trying to add a little personal flair to a stone arch, only to be told that your job isn't to innovate, but to execute. It's like being asked to paint within the lines, except the lines weigh several tons and could crush you if you screw up. Let's not forget the financial reality hanging over our medieval masons, like a particularly ominous rain cloud. The masons laboring on these projects weren't banking on stocks or enjoying year-end bonuses. Instead, their pay was as unpredictable as a medieval weather forecast. In 14th century England, a mason might earn around 6 pence a day, which isn't even enough to buy a sheep, let alone make a down payment on a castle of your own. Today, we might romanticize the notion of working on a project like Notre Dame, but back then, it was more about survival than artistry. And yet, the work of these masons endures, etched in stone and history alike. Gothic cathedrals, with their pointed arches and flying buttresses, stand as monuments not just to religious devotion, but to the extraordinary labor that went into them. The stone towers and fortifications of castles like Windsor and the Tower of London don't just represent royal power. They echo the sweat and toil of the masons who constructed them under less than royal conditions. Now, let's fast forward to today, where modern architects and historians still puzzle over how these medieval structures were built without the aid of modern technology. The answer is simple: a lot of manpower, a dash of ingenuity, and a healthy dose of elbow grease. The masons relied on wooden scaffolds, hand-pulled pulleys, and sheer determination to hoist stones weighing hundreds of pounds into place. It's like watching an episode of medieval engineering, extreme edition, with no safety nets or CGI. Sure, modern construction technology makes it easier to build skyscrapers in record time, but the essence of the work remains the same. Today's construction workers, much like their medieval counterparts, face the daily grind of long hours and physical labor, often for modest pay. And while we might not be building cathedrals anymore, the struggle for dignity and fair compensation in labor is as relevant now as it was then. It's the timeless tale of human effort against the backdrop of economic reality. So, what can we take away from the story of the medieval mason? For one, the structures they built have stood the test of time, much like the human spirit that built them. Despite the hardships, these masons left a legacy that continues to inspire awe and wonder. They remind us that while the world changes, the core of human endeavor, our quest to create and to endure, remains constant. As you walk through the shadow of a medieval cathedral or stand atop a castle wall, remember not just the grandeur of the architecture, but the lives and labor that made it possible. The mason's story is one of resilience, skill, and a touch of stubbornness. It's a story that resonates with anyone who has ever worked hard for recognition, fought for fair wages, or taken pride in a job well done, even if the credit went to someone else. In the end, the medieval mason's legacy is carved into the very stones they shaped. It's a reminder that while our tools have evolved and our skyscrapers stretch higher, the essence of work, the sweat, the skill, and the satisfaction of a job well done, remains the same. Whether you're chiseling stone in the 13th century or coding in the 21st, the pursuit of dignity and fair compensation in labor is a tale as old as time. And with that, we close the book on our medieval masons, whose hands shaped the landscapes of their world, leaving behind a legacy as enduring as the stone structures they brought to life. As history continues to build upon itself, these artisans remind us that every brick laid today stands upon the foundation of yesterday's toils. So, next time you gaze up at those ancient cathedrals, spare a thought for the masons who, one chisel stroke at a time, turned ordinary stones into timeless stories. The rooster's call slices through the early dawn like a nagging alarm clock, pulling you from dreams of chasing dragons or calculating taxes, whichever your subconscious prefers. You blink away the remnants of sleep, and there you are in the bustling heart of the Han dynasty, a time where the air is thick with the scent of incense, and the world is painted in the muted colors of earth and stone. Your home isn't exactly what Zillow would call a charming fixer-upper. It's a modest affair, built from rammed earth and wood, and if you're lucky, topped with a clay tile roof. No central heating here, folks, just the warmth of a family crammed into shared spaces. The floors are beaten earth, perhaps covered with a mat if you're feeling particularly fancy. Privacy is more of a concept than a reality, with rooms divided by curtains or wooden partitions. But hey, at least the drafts keep you humble. Family is the bedrock of your existence, and the Han dynasty isn't subtle about this. The social order is as rigid as your grandmother's ancient dumplings. Confucian values are the gospel, and filial piety is the hymn. You're expected to honor your parents, ancestors, and anyone who's ever had a say in your upbringing. It's a full-time job, this reverence business. The pressures of maintaining harmony can make a dinner with your in-laws look like a cakewalk. Speaking of family dynamics, it's not just about who gets the biggest piece of duck at dinner. The Han household is a microcosm of the empire itself, a hierarchy where age and gender dictate your standing. Patriarchy is alive and well, with the eldest male usually calling the shots. Women, on the other hand, are the unsung heroes, managing the household and occasionally getting a word in edgewise. Now, about those Confucian values. Sure, they sound serene on paper, with all that talk of benevolence and righteousness. But the reality, picture a pressure cooker set to explode. The expectations to uphold these ideals are as heavy as the emperor's dinnerware. One wrong move and you're the black sheep, bringing dishonor faster than you can say, kowtow. It's no wonder the occasional rebellion brews over in the recesses of your mind. Yet, for all its rigidity, the family structure provides stability in a world where the mandate of heaven can change hands more often than a hot potato. You live in a society where the emperor is seen as the father of the nation, a paternal figure whose benevolence or tyranny trickles down to every household. It's a delicate balance, this life of yours, a blend of tradition, duty, and the occasional indulgence in fermented beverages when the pressure mounts. As you prepare to start your day, you can't help but marvel at the complexity of life under the Han. It's a world where the past is revered, the present is a balancing act, and the future is as unpredictable as the next lunar eclipse. So you take a deep breath, embrace the chaos, and step into the day, ready to navigate the intricate web of family, duty, and the ever-evolving dance of tradition. So, with a hearty stretch, and maybe a yawn that rivals the Great Wall in length, you step into the morning chaos of the Han dynasty. It's breakfast time, and while you might not have the luxury of a drive-through latte, what awaits you is nothing short of a gastronomic journey through ancient innovation. Now, before we dive into your breakfast bowl, let's talk about how that meal made it to your table. You can thank agricultural innovations like the iron plough for your sustenance. This isn't just any farming tool. It's a game changer. Picture a hulking piece of iron slicing through the earth like a hot knife through butter. Before this marvel, farmers relied on wooden or stone ploughs, which were about as efficient as using a spoon to dig a trench. The iron plough revolutionized agriculture, allowing you to turn over nutrient-rich soil with ease, increasing productivity and feeding more hungry mouths. And let's not forget about water mills, which made grain grinding less of a back-breaking chore and more of a well-oiled operation. But it wasn't just the local land that filled your pantry. The Silk Road wasn't just some ancient highway for trading silk. This legendary trade route was your connection to the world, or at least the parts that mattered. Stretching over 4,000 miles, from the heart of China to the Mediterranean, it was an ancient Amazon prime, albeit with slightly longer delivery times. Imagine spices, nuts, and fruits from far-off lands reaching your table, adding a bit of pizzazz to otherwise mundane meals. Speaking of meals, what's for breakfast? Well, if you're expecting bacon and eggs, you're in for a surprise. The Han breakfast is a humble affair, often starting with congee, a rice porridge that's as versatile as a little black dress. Add some pickled vegetables or fermented tofu, and you've got yourself a meal that sticks to your ribs. For those feeling fancy, maybe you'll have some millet porridge. Because why not switch it up with another grain that's been around since before your ancestors could say emperor? Now let's sprinkle in some economic context. The Han dynasty loved its taxes like a kid loves candy, and agriculture was the empire's bread and butter, literally. Farmers were the backbone of the economy, and their productivity was the lifeblood of the state. But don't mistake this for an idyllic scene of pastoral bliss. Farmers paid taxes in grain, and a bad harvest could mean the difference between a full belly and an empty one. It's a high-stakes game of survival, where your livelihood depends on the whims of weather and the benevolence of bureaucrats. And while we're myth-busting, let's talk about the Silk Road's romanticized image as a bustling marketplace of harmonious cultural exchange. Sure, that's part of the story, but let's not forget the perils. Bandits, treacherous terrain, and the odd territorial dispute made it as dangerous as it was lucrative. So, the next time you sprinkle some imported spices on your breakfast, remember the precarious journey it took to get there. But back to breakfast. Let's not forget the beverage of choice. Tea, as we know it today, wasn't quite the staple yet, so you're more likely to wash down your meal with a hearty broth or even some fermented wine if you're feeling particularly indulgent. After all, fermentation wasn't just for the food. It was also a way to ensure your drink was safe, and let's face it, sometimes you need a little liquid courage to face another day in the Han dynasty. In essence, your breakfast is a microcosm of the Han dynasty itself, a blend of innovation, tradition, and a dash of foreign influence. It's a meal that tells a story of survival, adaptation, and the relentless march of progress fueled by necessity. As you sip your broth and ponder the complexity of your world, it's clear that the Han dynasty is a tapestry woven with the threads of commerce, agriculture, and a touch of adventure. And just like that, you're ready to tackle whatever the day throws your way, be it filial duties or the ever-present challenge of keeping up with the emperor's latest edicts. So, with your morning meal just a memory, and perhaps a hint of fermented courage still tingling on your tongue, it's time to dive into the daily grind of Han dynasty life. Whether you're wielding a plough, a chisel, or a ledger, the day waits for no one, not even an emperor. Let's talk about work in this ancient empire, where your occupation isn't just what you do, it's who you are. First, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the ox in the field. If you're a farmer, congratulations, you're part of the backbone of Han society. Agriculture, after all, was the lifeblood of the economy, and your efforts literally kept the empire fed. But before you picture a serene pastoral life, let's sprinkle in some realism. Farming was back-breaking work, and not in a metaphorical sense. We're talking about long days under the sun, coaxing grain from the earth with tools that, despite some innovations, still demanded sweat equity. The Han dynasty's iron plough and improved irrigation methods were like the smartphones of their time, game changers, but you still had to do the work. Now, about that economic landscape. Taxes, taxes, and more taxes. The Han government loved a good tax policy like a panda loves bamboo. Farmers coughed up a hefty portion of their grain to the state, which could range from 10 to 50%, depending on the year and the bureaucrat's mood. And if the harvest failed, well, let's just say you might find yourself bartering your prized goat for a sack of millet. It was a high-stakes game, where nature was your partner and nemesis all rolled into one. Speaking of stakes, let's wander into the bustling world of artisans and merchants. Imagine you're an artisan, crafting fine pottery or weaving silk that would eventually find its way to far-flung lands like Rome. Your work is precise, demanding precision and artistry, and your products are the ancient equivalent of a Gucci handbag, coveted and sometimes counterfeited. But unlike the farmers, artisans weren't taxed in grain. Instead, you might find yourself paying in finished goods or labor. It's a different kind of pressure, but pressure nonetheless. And then there are the merchants, the travelers of the day, venturing along the Silk Road with caravans of goods. These traders were the original globalists, moving silks, spices, and ideas across continents. But let's bust a myth right here. The romantic notion of a merchant striking it rich overnight is about as likely as finding a unicorn in your backyard. The reality was you had to navigate not only the treacherous terrain, but also a labyrinth of tariffs and taxes that could eat into your profits faster than a sandstorm in the Gobi Desert. Let's talk currency. In the Han dynasty, commerce wasn't just a barter affair. The government minted coins, those charming little round things with square holes that were as much a part of life as chopsticks. Made of bronze, they were called Wuzhu coins, weighing around 3-2 grams, and were the official currency. But don't let their quaint appearance fool you. They were serious business. The economic stability of your household often depended on these little metal discs. But in a twist of irony, despite the coin's importance, most transactions among the lower classes still happened through barter. It's a reminder that currency is only as useful as the trust people place in it. Now, let's get real about social mobility, or the lack thereof. The Han dynasty wasn't exactly the land of opportunity if you were born on the wrong side of the tracks. Your job was often determined by your family's status, and climbing the social ladder was about as easy as scaling the Great Wall with buttered shoes. The rigid class structures meant that a farmer's son was expected to follow in his father's footsteps, and the same went for artisans and merchants. Sure, there were exceptions, like the occasional scholar who rose through the ranks after acing the imperial exams, but these were rare. The truth is, the rags-to-riches narrative is more fairy tale than fact, with most people living and dying within the social strata they were born into. And speaking of government involvement, let's not forget the role of state monopolies. The Han government wasn't shy about taking control of lucrative industries, salt and iron, to name a couple. These monopolies were designed to fill imperial coffers, but often left small-scale producers and traders struggling to compete. It's a bit like trying to open a mom-and-pop grocery store next to a Walmart, with predictably uneven results. In this world, your job wasn't just a way to put food on the table. It was your identity, your place in the universe. Whether you were tilling fields, crafting goods, or trading along the Silk Road, your occupation defined your status and your future, or lack thereof. It's a reminder of the rigidity of social structures and the enduring human desire to define ourselves by our work, even when the system is stacked against us. As you wrap up another day of toil, perhaps you find a moment to reflect on your place in this grand tapestry of the Han dynasty. It's a complex mosaic of duty, survival, and the occasional glimmer of ambition in a world where the rules are as strict as the Confucian texts that guide them. And yet, for all its constraints, life in the Han is an intricate dance of tradition and progress, where your role, no matter how small, contributes to the empire's enduring legacy. So, as the sun dips below the horizon and the day's labor gives way to the calm of the evening, remember this. Every coin earned, every field tilled, and every trade made is a step in the relentless march of history. The Han dynasty is a world of contrasts and contradictions, where the past and future collide in the present moment, leaving you to navigate the complexity with a mix of grit, determination, and perhaps a bit of humor to lighten the load. And with that, you set down your tools, ready to face another day in the ever-turning wheel of history. As the tools find their resting place, and the day's labor fades into the rearview mirror of history, you find yourself with a few precious hours of daylight to kill. Welcome to the bustling heart of Han dynasty social life. A trip to the local market, or, if you're feeling particularly indulgent, the public bathhouse. It's time to swap the sweat of toil for the clamor of commerce and maybe a bit of gossip, because let's face it, human nature hasn't changed much in 2,000 years. Now, don't let the term market conjure up images of your local farmer's market with artisanal cheeses and gluten-free muffins. The Han market is a sensory overload of sights, sounds, and yes, smells. Picture stalls crammed with everything from silk and spices to chickens clucking away like they own the place. This isn't just a place for buying and selling goods, it's the social media of its day. Here, you're as likely to trade in news and rumors as you are in silk and grain. Gossip travels faster than a courier on horseback, and if you want to know who's who and what's what, the market is your go-to source. Let's talk specifics. A bustling market in a mid-sized Han city might stretch over several acres, hosting hundreds of vendors. Prices are as fluid as the Yellow River, with a jar of soy sauce costing as much as a silk sash one day and a handful of millet the next. The art of haggling is alive and well, with vendors and customers in a constant verbal dance over the worth of a chicken or the quality of a bolt of silk. But the market is not just about tangible goods. It's a hub of public entertainment, the Netflix of the ancient world, if you will. Street performers, musicians, and acrobats vie for your attention and your coins. Imagine a juggler balancing porcelain bowls or a musician plucking melodies on a guzheng, the ancient Chinese zither. It's a chaotic symphony of human creativity and enterprise, where every performer is both artist and entrepreneur, hoping your applause translates into a little extra cash. Now let's mosey over to the public bathhouse, the ancient equivalent of your local spa day, but with a communal twist. These aren't just places to scrub off the dirt of the day. They're social arenas where political alliances are forged and gossip flows as freely as the bathwater. Admission to these bathhouses is a couple of bronze coins, a small price for some relaxation and a chance to network with peers or rivals. It's a place where the lines between personal and public blur, and everyone, from merchants to magistrates, sheds their robes and social pretenses. As you soak in the warm waters, let's talk philosophy and religion, because they don't just shape social practices. They're the invisible threads weaving through the fabric of daily life. Confucianism, Taoism, and folk religions play these roles with varying degrees of nuance and impact. Confucianism, with its emphasis on hierarchy and duty, is the backbone of societal norms. It's the reason you bow deeply to your elders and keep your opinions about the emperor's latest edict to yourself. It's a philosophy that preaches harmony, but often at the cost of individual freedom. Taoism, on the other hand, is like a fresh breeze through the rigid corridors of Confucianism. It whispers of harmony with nature, encouraging you to go with the flow, quite literally. Its influence is seen in art, medicine, and even politics, urging a balance between the yin and yang of life. But don't be fooled by its serene surface. Taoism has its own set of complex rituals and practices that can tie you in knots faster than a Confucian scholar can quote the Analects. Let's not forget the folk religions, a colorful tapestry of beliefs involving ancestor worship, local deities, and the ever-present spirits. These are the traditions that make you leave offerings at a shrine or consult a shaman when the harvest fails. They're deeply personal and community-driven, reminding you that for every grand philosophical doctrine, there's a belief system rooted in the everyday struggles and triumphs of life. Now, let's tackle the role of women in this intricate web of social practices. The Han dynasty isn't exactly what you'd call a feminist utopia. Women's freedoms are limited, their roles largely confined to domestic spheres. Arranged marriages are the norm, and the production of a male heir isn't just desired, it's expected. But don't mistake subservience for absence. Women wield influence in the household and, by extension, in the broader community. They are the keepers of family secrets and the architects of domestic harmony, a role as crucial as it is unrecognized. Yet, for all the talk of harmony, the Han society is far from the idyllic, peaceful realm romanticized in some histories. Beneath the surface of filial piety and communal gatherings, tensions simmer. Conflicts over land, resources, and political power are as common as the daily sunrise. Rebellions might be quashed swiftly by the iron hand of the state, but they're a constant reminder of the societal fractures that run deeper than the Great Wall. Let's debunk a myth while we're at it. The romanticized vision of a universally harmonious society. It's about as real as a unicorn sighting. The Han dynasty, like any complex society, is rife with class struggles, political intrigues, and cultural clashes. The harmony preached by Confucianism often masks the reality of a society fraught with inequality and injustice. It's a world where the emperor's word is law, but the whispers in the marketplaces and bathhouses tell a different story. As you dry off and prepare to head home, perhaps with a trinket from the market or a nugget of gossip tucked away, remember this. The Han dynasty is a living, breathing organism. It thrives on the interactions and exchanges of its people, the ebb and flow of daily life, shaping its course as much as any decree from the throne. It's a reminder that history isn't just dates and events. It's the stories of people, their struggles, ambitions, and the delicate dance of tradition and change. In the Han dynasty, the past is ever present, the future ever uncertain, and the present moment, a tapestry of contradictions waiting to be unraveled. As you wander back through the dimming streets, lit by the flickering glow of oil lamps, the daily grind of Han life fades into the comforting hum of crickets. It seems like a good time for a reflective pause, because let's face it, the Han dynasty isn't just about the day's toil and marketplace chatter. This is a civilization that has its fingerprints all over history, like a mischievous kid at a wet cement sidewalk. First, let's talk politics, because in the Han dynasty, politics is as pervasive as rice in your daily diet. You don't have the luxury of voting for your leaders, but the bureaucratic machine is something to behold. Imagine a government so intricate it makes a modern DMV look like a lemonade stand. At the heart of it all is the civil service exam system, a brainchild of the Han that served like a golden ticket to social mobility for the few who could hack it. This isn't your high school pop quiz. It's a grueling test of Confucian classics, poetry, and legal knowledge. Pass it, and you could find yourself catapulted from peasant to prestigious government official faster than you can say examination stress. The civil service system is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's a meritocratic marvel, offering a sliver of hope to the bright, ambitious minds slogging away in obscurity. On the other, it's a pressure cooker of expectations, where failure means returning to a life of mundane toil. For the elite few who pass, it's a lifetime of service to the emperor, working within a bureaucratic machine as vast and rigid as the Great Wall. And while we're on the subject of walls, let's remember the Han weren't just bureaucratic busybodies. They were also builders. The Great Wall, though initially constructed by earlier dynasties, was expanded and fortified under the Han, stretching over 13,000 miles. That's like running a marathon back and forth 100 times over. The wall wasn't just a military barrier. It was a statement, a colossal "do not disturb" sign to the nomadic tribes of the north. But the Han weren't just about walls and exams. They were also scientific innovators. Take papermaking, for instance. Before Kai Lun's breakthrough, writing was done on bamboo slips or silk, which were about as practical as trying to write a novel on a roll of duct tape. Around 105 CE, Kai Lun introduced paper made from mulberry bark, hemp, and old rags. This wasn't just a nifty invention, it was revolutionary. Paper democratized knowledge, making it more accessible, and eventually spread across the world like wildfire. It's a legacy so enduring that even today, in our digital age, we still talk about going paperless, as if paper hasn't already won the era. Then there's the seismograph, an ancient instrument that sounds like it belongs in a steampunk novel. Invented by Zhang Heng in 132 CE, this marvel of engineering could detect earthquakes hundreds of miles away. Picture a bronze urn with 8 dragon heads, each holding a ball. When the earth shook, a mechanism inside would release a ball from the mouth of the dragon pointing in the direction of the tremor, alerting officials to impending doom. It's a testament to the Han's blend of scientific curiosity and practical application, a precursor to the modern devices that keep us informed today. Sure, the Han dynasty wasn't all sunshine and silk. Political intrigue was as common as the seasonal floods, with power struggles and palace coups that would make any soap opera blush. The Empress Dowager Lu Zhai, for instance, wielded power with an iron fist during the early years of the dynasty, and her reign was marked by purges worthy of a Shakespearean tragedy. Yet, for all its turmoil, the Han era laid down political and scientific foundations that echo through time. And let's not forget the economy. The Silk Road was the Han's crowning jewel, a vast network of trade routes that connected China with the West. This wasn't just an ancient highway for silk and spices. It was the internet of its day, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture. The Han economy thrived on this trade, and it left a legacy of cultural exchange that has shaped the world in ways we're still unraveling today. But let's bust a myth while we're reflecting on all this grandeur. The idea of the Han dynasty as a golden age of unbroken peace and prosperity is as fictitious as the notion that emperors never wore plain robes. The reality was a complex dance of prosperity and hardship, innovation and stagnation, ruled by human whims as much as divine mandates. The dynasty rose and fell on the shoulders of its people, from the peasants toiling in the fields to the scholars penning treatises on governance. As you settle in for the night, perhaps with a cup of rice wine to warm your spirits, consider the enduring legacy of the Han dynasty. Its innovations in governance, science, and culture are the bedrock upon which much of modern civilization rests. Far from the myth of ancient stagnation, the Han was a vibrant, dynamic period that challenged the limits of human potential. It reminds us that history isn't just a series of dusty dates and facts. It's a living narrative, a tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, ingenuity, and the relentless pursuit of progress. So, as you drift off to sleep, know that the Han dynasty, with all its contradictions and complexities, is more than just a chapter in a history book. It's a reminder of the power of human achievement and a testament to the enduring impact of those who dared to dream beyond the horizon. And with that, you close your eyes, content in the knowledge that even in the ancient world, the future was always just a step away. It's the crack of dawn in the Viking Age, and you're waking up in a longhouse that smells faintly of yesterday's fish stew and wood smoke. As you groggily rise from your straw-filled bed, you realize that Viking life is quite the axe-swinging, mead-guzzling saga Hollywood sells us. Nope, it's more like a never-ending episode of Iron Age survival. Domestic edition, with a dash of Norse flair. You stretch out, and let's be honest, you're not about to jump into a dragon-headed longship and sail off to raid some English monastery. Instead, your day is about the nitty-gritty grind that keeps the Viking world ticking. Women in Norse society were basically the original multitaskers. Forget about just tending to hearth and home. Viking women were the backbone of the economy, social structure, and let's face it, probably a lot happier not getting seasick on a stormy North Sea. First off, you're not just managing a household. You're overseeing a micro-empire. Farms didn't run themselves, and women were the ones calling the shots on everything from crop planning to livestock management. Archaeological finds, like the Oseberg ship burial, tell us Viking women had access to wealth and status. And no, it wasn't all about fancy brooches, although those did look pretty snazzy. As you shuffle past the fire pit to check on the morning porridge, because yes, carbs are life, you ponder the myth of the domestic Viking woman. While it's true that family life was central, the notion that women were chained to the cooking pot is about as accurate as a berserker in a tutu. Women were the primary textile producers, and not just for clothing. They made sailcloth, which, fun fact, was as crucial to Viking expeditions as swords and shields. No sails, no raids. So there you go, without women, no epic voyages to Valhalla's doorstep. While you're at it, let's debunk another myth. Viking women weren't just passive background players in the trade game. They were actively involved in commerce, bartering goods like wool and crafted items. Take the Birka female trader's grave from Sweden, for instance. It's got all the bling you'd expect from a high-status merchant, showing that women were key players in the bustling trade networks that stretched from the Middle East to the icy reaches of the North Atlantic. As you munch on some dried fish, because breakfast choices are limited when refrigerators are centuries away, you can't help but appreciate the social safety net that Viking women wove into their communities. Marriages were more about alliances than romance, and a well-managed household was a political statement. Women could inherit property, which was a pretty progressive concept in an era where most women elsewhere had about as much legal standing as a goat. The sun's climbing higher, and the chores are piling up. You're thinking about heading out to the loom, where you'll spend the next few hours in a trance of wool and warp. Textile production was so integral that it could even influence trade routes. Remember those sails. They were so valuable that, in some contexts, they were practically currency. Viking women were literally weaving the fabric of their society's success. Now, let's talk about those longhouses. They were the social and economic hubs, and women were the rulers of these wooden fortresses. You're like the CEO of a bustling household, juggling everything from food storage to family disputes. And let's face it, any dude thinking he's in charge is just one burnt loaf away from a reality check. As the day heats up, you might take a moment to reflect on the larger-than-life sagas. Sure, they're full of larger-than-life heroes, but women had roles that were more than just footnotes. You've got shield maidens like Lagertha, who may or may not be more legend than fact, but they symbolize the real agency women had in Viking society. By midday, you're knee-deep in the business of the day, quite literally if you're tending to livestock. You might be bartering goods at a local market, and here's a fun fact. Viking women had the right to initiate divorce. So, if your husband's more about beer than building, you've got options. This autonomy was rare in medieval Europe, and it's a testament to the unique social structure that let women wield power both inside and outside the home. As the sun starts to dip, the longhouse fills with the aroma of stew, a staple because, let's be honest, Viking cuisine wasn't exactly Michelin-starred. You gather with family and helpers to share stories and news, reinforcing those community bonds that are as vital as any iron sword. The day winds down, and as you settle by the fire, you realize that the legacy of Viking women is one of resilience and resourcefulness. Tonight, as the stars peek through the smoke hole in the roof, you're reminded that history is more than just the tales of warriors and kings. It's the story of everyday lives, where women like you kept the gears of Viking society grinding smoothly. And as you drift off to sleep, you might just dream of the voyages your handiwork will enable, your contributions echoing across time. As the stars twinkle through the smoke hole, you drift off with visions not of warriors in battle, but of the quiet power wielded by Viking women through their legal rights, a tale that's as gripping as any saga. Let's peel back the layers of Norse lore and see how women in Viking society broke the medieval mold, wielding rights that would make their European counterparts green with envy, or maybe just plain confused. So you wake up to another day in the Viking Age, and while you're not exactly jumping out of bed to check your latest piece of mail, carrier ravens are notoriously unreliable. You've got a lot on your plate. Now here's where things get fascinating. Unlike women in, say, 9th century England or France, you, as a Viking woman, have the legal swagger to inherit property. Yes, you heard that right. While your neighbors to the south were busy ensuring women had about as much legal standing as the family pet, you could own land, which was a huge deal. Land was not just a patch of grass and a few sheep. It was wealth, power, and independence. This legal autonomy didn't stop at property. If your marriage was more ice than fire, you had the right to initiate divorce. Picture it. A world where you could say, I think we need to see other people, and not end up in the stocks. Your dowry would come back to you, a sort of medieval prenup that ensured you wouldn't end up destitute if things went south. Talk about forward thinking. This wasn't just a nod to women's rights. It was a practical safeguard in a world where alliances were as unstable as a Viking longship in a hurricane. Now let's zoom out and see how this compares to the rest of the medieval world. In many places, women were effectively property themselves. In England, for example, the law of the land, literally, was that women couldn't own it. The best many European women could hope for was to be married off to someone who wasn't a total disaster. And don't even get me started on inheritance laws. It was like trying to win a rigged game of medieval Monopoly. The Norse approach wasn't just about giving women rights for the sake of it. This was about ensuring the survival and prosperity of the community. A woman who could manage land and wealth effectively was an asset, not a liability. She could make decisions that kept the family's farm productive and profitable. And that was vital in a world where winter could be a real-life Game of Thrones scenario. So, as you go about your day, perhaps overseeing the farm or trading at the market, you carry with you the weight of legal rights that act as a shield and a sword. It's these rights that give you a voice in the Thing, the Norse assembly where disputes were settled. Here you could stand toe-to-toe with men, wielding not a sword, but a sharp tongue and a keen mind. The Thing was a place where legal matters and community issues were hashed out, and women had a say in these proceedings. This was participatory democracy, Viking style, and it was as rough and ready as you'd expect. The contrast with other contemporary societies couldn't be starker. In many parts of Europe, women were sidelined, their opinions about as sought after as a cold eel stew. Yet in Viking society, a woman's ability to manage her household, her land, and her legal affairs was crucial. It wasn't just about fairness, it was about survival. These rights ensured that women weren't just passengers on the voyage of life, but were steering the ship. And speaking of voyages, let's not forget that Viking women's legal rights extended beyond the village and farmstead. Maritime law and trade regulations also recognized their rights. As trade stretched from the Byzantine Empire to the British Isles, Viking women could own and operate businesses, a feat that would make many of their contemporaries swoon with envy, or at least blink in disbelief. As the sun dips lower and you gather your family for the evening meal, these rights are more than just perks. They are the threads that weave the fabric of your society's success. So, the next time someone tells you that the Vikings were all about raids and plunder, you can smile knowingly, because you've got the inside scoop. Viking women weren't just background players. They were the directors of a society that, while not perfect, was remarkably progressive for its time. And so, as you settle back by the fire, you might ponder the legacy of these rights. They weren't just about personal freedom. They were about shaping a society that valued resilience, adaptability, and a keen sense of justice. It's a legacy that echoes down the corridors of time, as enduring as the sagas themselves. As you drift off, remember that history isn't just written by the victors. It's crafted by those who dared to wield their rights like an axe, carving out a place for themselves in a world that was as unpredictable as the North Sea. And Viking women, they were nothing if not daring. So, as you find yourself cocooned in the woolen embrace of another Viking night, it's time to turn our gaze to the vibrant tapestry of storytelling and religion, where women weren't just passengers, but the captains of culture. You might think of Viking women as the world's first content creators, spinning tales and myths that shaped hearts and minds long before Instagram and TikTok were even twinkles in the digital eye. First up, let's chat about storytelling. In a world where Netflix binging was swapping sagas by the firelight, oral tradition was the glue that held Viking society together. Women were the custodians of these narratives, and let's be honest, they had more plot twists than a soap opera marathon. These weren't just bedtime stories. They were the family albums, history books, and moral compasses rolled into one. Women, often the wise ones of the household, passed down tales that taught values, preserved history, and occasionally spiced things up with a bit of scandal. Picture this. You're huddled around the hearth, and the air is thick with the aroma of simmering stew. A woman begins to recite the saga of Gudrid Thorbjarnardóttir, a real-life Viking woman who journeyed all the way to North America around the year 1000. That's right, centuries before Columbus even thought about setting sail. Gudrid's story wasn't just an epic tale of adventure, it was a powerful narrative of resilience and wanderlust that inspired generations. Women like her turned the whisper of possibilities into the roar of legends. Now, let's sail into the mystic seas of Norse mythology, where Viking women were nothing short of divine. Forget the damsels in distress. Norse goddesses were fierce, complex, and not afraid to wield their power. Take Freyja, the goddess of love, beauty, and war. She was the Norse equivalent of a multitasking boss. Worshipped by many, Freyja symbolized fertility and was often called upon for matters of the heart and the harvest. She was no shy wallflower. According to the sagas, she had a chariot pulled by cats. Yes, cats. Talk about riding into battle with style. And who could forget Frigg, Odin's wife, whose insight and wisdom were unmatched? She was the ultimate mom influencer, with a following that spanned the 9 realms. Frigg was associated with foresight, because, let's face it, even gods need a little help planning ahead. Her presence in the myths shows that women's voices were revered, and their intuition wasn't just respected, it was divine. But let's not gloss over the darker shades of these myths. In the sagas, women's fates were sometimes harsher than a North Sea winter. The Valkyries, those warrior maidens who chose the slain and brought them to Valhalla, were often depicted as both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Serving Odin, they were the judges over life and death, and their narratives highlight the complex duality of women's roles in Norse culture, powerful yet bound by fate. Now, speaking of fate, let's not forget the Norns. These mythical beings, akin to the Greek fates, were the arbiters of destiny, weaving the threads of life. They remind us that in Norse belief, women were not just storytellers, but the very architects of existence. It's a far cry from the simplistic portrayals we often see today, where Viking women are reduced to side characters in a testosterone-fueled saga. The reality was a much more intricate dance of power, prophecy, and presence. And while Hollywood loves to paint Viking women as either shield maidens or silent partners, the truth is they wielded influence in ways both seen and unseen. Take the sagas and runestones, literal rock-solid evidence of women's roles in society. Runestones, often erected in memory of the deceased, tell us more than just dates and names. They're mini-biographies etched in stone, revealing the social status and family ties of the women they commemorate. Runestones like the one raised by a woman named Ingjibjorg in memory of her husband reveal the agency women had in shaping their legacies. These stones weren't just markers of loss. They were declarations of agency, a way for women to carve their stories into the very landscape. The inscriptions speak volumes about the respect and status women commanded, standing as silent witnesses to their enduring influence. But here's where modern media often misses the mark. While contemporary portrayals might highlight the grit and glamour of Viking life, they tend to gloss over the nuances. The truth is, Viking women were as likely to be found managing complex household economies as they were to be swinging swords. They were the ones ensuring the household's survival, the unsung heroines crafting the sails that powered their husbands' ships. As for religion, Viking women weren't just participants, they were practitioners and prophets. Seeresses, known as Völvers, held significant spiritual authority. They were the mystics of their age, conducting rituals and offering prophecies. In a society that revered the unseen as much as the tangible, these women wielded a power that transcended the everyday. Yet, let's not romanticize it too much. Being a Völver wasn't all about mystical visions and divine insight. It came with its own set of challenges. These women operated on the fringes of society, respected yet feared, a testament to the delicate balance of reverence and suspicion that marked their roles. It's a reminder that even in a culture that celebrated the divine feminine, the reality was often as complex as the myths themselves. So, as you gather around the fire, weaving tales and sharing visions, you're not just part of a community. You're a cornerstone of it. Your stories and insights are the threads that bind your society together, creating a tapestry as rich and varied as the sagas themselves. And as the night deepens, you realize that while the world sees Viking women as mere figures in a distant legend, the truth is far more epic. They were the storytellers, the mythmakers, and the very architects of the Norse cosmos. As the embers glow and the tales weave their magic, you know that the legacy of Viking women is as enduring as the runestones scattered across Scandinavia. It's a history not just of survival, but of thriving, where women's voices echoed with the power of gods and the wisdom of ages. And as you drift into sleep, you're not just dreaming of warriors and gods. You're dreaming of the women who shaped the sagas, and in doing so, shaped the world. So, as you drift into sleep, dreaming of the women who shaped the sagas, let's spend our afternoon on a little adventure, literally. Viking women weren't just storytellers and legal eagles. They were movers and shakers on a global scale. Yep, buckle up, because we're about to explore how these women weren't just homebodies. They were also trailblazers in exploration and settlement. Let's start with a little myth-busting. The image of the fierce shield maiden, hair blowing in the wind as she charges into battle, is as captivating as it is misleading. Sure, the sagas mention women like Lagertha, but let's not get carried away. While some women likely took up arms, everyday Viking life didn't involve women constantly gearing up for battle. Recent archaeological digs have uncovered grave that suggest some women were indeed warriors, like the famous Birka warrior grave in Sweden, which DNA tests revealed belonged to a woman. But this was the exception, not the rule. The real strength of Viking women lay in their capacity to adapt and thrive in new environments. Take Gudrid Thorbjarnardóttir, for example. This real-life explorer sailed to North America around the year 1000, long before Columbus made his journey. Gudrid's adventures are documented in the sagas, and archaeological evidence from sites in Newfoundland supports the Norse presence there. Her story isn't just about travel. It's about the grit and determination needed to settle in unknown lands. Now, speaking of settling, let's talk economics. Viking expeditions were not just about plunder, they were about trade, settlement, and yes, even family. When Vikings set sail, they brought their households with them, creating new communities in places like Iceland, Greenland, and even parts of Russia. These weren't just reckless voyages, they were strategic moves to expand their world. The settlement of Iceland around the late 9th century, for instance, was a family affair. Women were crucial in establishing these communities, managing households, and ensuring survival in harsh new climates. And let's not forget about commerce. Women were pivotal in the Viking trade network, which stretched from the Middle East to the icy fringes of the North Atlantic. They weren't just tagging along. They were active participants in trade, bartering goods like textiles, furs, and crafted items. Viking women had a knack for making the most of their resources and were key players in a trade system that included everything from Arab silver to Byzantine silks. Speaking of trade, let's debunk the notion that Vikings were just about raiding. Sure, raiding was a part of their economy, but it wasn't the whole story. Women helped sustain long-term trade relationships, and their textile work, particularly the production of sailcloth, was fundamental. Without sails, there were no ships, and without ships, well, there went the empire. This was an era where sails were worth their weight in silver and could be traded as currency. So, while the men might have been out swinging swords, it was the women who were often making sure the sails were ready to roll. Now, here's where recent science gives us a fresh perspective. Thanks to DNA studies, we're starting to understand just how far Viking women traveled. Genetic testing of modern populations in places like Iceland and the British Isles reveals a significant Norse ancestry, confirming that women were part of these far-flung ventures. This was no boys, only club. Viking women were part of the story, not just as wives and mothers, but as pioneers in their own right. And while we're on the topic of exploration, let's not skip over the social dynamics. Viking society had its own brand of gender roles, but women had a level of agency that was, frankly, ahead of its time. They could divorce, own property, and wield influence in the thing. This wasn't just about equality. It was about practicality. In a harsh world, everyone had to pull their weight, and women's contributions were essential to the community's survival. As we wrap up this afternoon's exploration, let's acknowledge the allure of the Shield Maiden myth. It's a compelling image, and who doesn't love a good warrior story? But the real story of women who sailed across oceans, settled new lands, and helped build a trade network that spanned continents is just as epic. It's a tale of resilience and adaptability, traits that ensured the Vikings didn't just survive but thrived. So, next time you hear a tale of Viking conquests, remember the women who were right there in the thick of it, not just as spectators, but as integral players in a saga that stretched across the known world. They were the ones who took the long view, ensuring that Viking society didn't just raid, but also rooted itself in new territories. And as the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows over the landscape, you can almost hear the echoes of those Viking women, traders, settlers, warriors of a different kind. They remind us that history is not just the story of kings and conquerors, but of the families and communities that dared to dream beyond the horizon. The next chapter awaits, where we'll dive deeper into how these intrepid women left their mark on history. One woven sail, one new settlement, one daring voyage at a time. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows over the landscape, you can almost hear the echoes of those Viking women, traders, settlers, warriors of a different kind. They remind us that history is not just the story of kings and conquerors, but of the families and communities that dared to dream beyond the horizon. Now, let's take a moment to ponder their legacy in our modern tapestry, woven with threads of nationalism, pop culture, and historical reinterpretation. Fast forward a millennium, and Viking women continue to sail through our cultural consciousness like longships on a mission. Their stories have been reshaped by national pride and narrative needs, often with more embellishment than a Viking chieftain's cloak. Take the 19th century Scandinavian nationalism, where Viking women were cast as paragons of virtue and strength, a neat fit for budding nation-states eager to root their identities in a romanticized past. It was less about historical accuracy and more about rallying the populace with tales of unyielding ancestors. Then there's pop culture, where Viking women are sometimes portrayed as shield maidens with more eyeliner than historical evidence. This trope of the battle-ready woman, while undeniably appealing, glosses over the complexities of real Viking women's lives. The truth: they were as likely to be found managing farms as they were to be swinging swords. Yet the allure of the shield maiden endures, partly because it's a narrative that speaks to modern desires for strong female archetypes in media. But why does understanding the real history matter? Well, it's about depth over drama. The actual lives of Viking women reveal a society where women wielded influence in ways both seen and unseen. Recognizing this nuance gives us a fuller picture of the past, one that acknowledges both the grit and grace of these women. It's a chance to appreciate the economic savvy of a Viking woman managing a farm, or the legal acumen of those who navigated the Thing, the Norse assembly, with all the diplomacy of a seasoned politician. Take the Birka warrior grave, which DNA analysis confirmed belonged to a woman. It forces us to re-evaluate the gender roles of the past, reminding us that history is less about rigid roles and more about the fluidity of human experience. It challenges our assumptions and asks us to look beyond the romantic sheen to the real individuals who lived and breathed in those times. Economically, the contributions of Viking women were nothing short of indispensable. They weren't just spinning wool, they were spinning the wheels of commerce. Their textile work, particularly in producing sailcloth, was crucial to the Norse economy. Without sails, the Viking Age might have been a mere footnote in history. And let's not forget the trade networks they sustained, which stretched from the Byzantine Empire to the British Isles. This was globalization before it was cool, folks. Politically, women's roles in the Thing were groundbreaking. They had a say in legal matters, a right that many women in medieval Europe could only dream of. This wasn't just about fairness. It was about ensuring the survival of a society that needed all hands on deck. Understanding this context reminds us that the past is neither as simple nor as static as we'd like to believe. So why does the legend persist? Well, myths have their own kind of truth, reflecting the values and desires of the times they're told in. The image of a fierce shield maiden speaks to our contemporary craving for empowerment and agency. It's a narrative that resonates in a world still grappling with gender equality. But while the legend is captivating, the reality is often more instructive. It's a reminder that strength comes in many forms, not just in warriors on the battlefield, but in the women who kept the hearth fires burning, the farms running, and the communities thriving. As the modern world continues to draw inspiration from the Viking Age, it's crucial to maintain a balance between myth and history. The sagas and runestones tell us of a time when women were not just bystanders, but pivotal players in their society. Their stories are more than historical footnotes. They're lessons in resilience, adaptability, and the power of community. In conclusion, the legacy of Viking women is one of complexity and contradiction, much like life itself. They were both revered and feared, celebrated and sidelined. Their stories, woven into the fabric of Viking society, remind us that history is not just a tale of swords and sails, but of the people who dared to chart their own course. So as you settle into the evening, let these stories of Viking women whisper through the ages, offering insights as enduring as a Norse winter night, and as vibrant as the northern lights dancing across the sky. In the heart of 15th century Poland, a place where winter could freeze even the sturdiest of beards, young Nicolaus Copernicus was born in 1473. Let's be honest, this was an era when the most exciting thing about the cosmos was trying not to freeze to death while watching it. But our boy Nikolaus wasn't just any kid with frostbitten fingers. He was destined to shake up the very foundation of how people understood the universe. Spoiler alert. The Earth doesn't sit like a lazy Susan at the center of an astronomical dining table. Born into a family where economic fortunes were as changeable as the Polish weather, young Copernicus had a bit of an edge. His father, a merchant, passed away when Nikolaus was just 10, leaving the family's fate in the hands of his uncle, Lucas Watsonrode. Now, Uncle Lucas wasn't your average clerical type, but a bishop with connections thicker than Krakow's fog. He had enough influence to get Nikolaus into the University of Krakow in 1491, a place that pulsed with the latest medieval ideas. And by latest, I mean theories that would make today's flat earthers seem avant-garde. Contrary to the myth of Copernicus as a lonely stargazer from the get-go, his early days were more about navigating the academic labyrinth than staring at the night sky. Picture this. Krakow wasn't exactly the center of the universe either, but it had a bustling intellectual scene where the word, revolutionary, applied more to the amount of ale consumed than groundbreaking scientific theories. Yet it was here that Nikolaus began his journey into the cosmos, taking courses in mathematics, philosophy, and, inevitably, astrology, a field that at the time was considered as legit as astronomy. After all, if you couldn't predict the future, what was the point of knowing the stars? But let's not romanticize his academic life too much. Universities in the 15th century were less about free thinking and more about memorizing what the Greeks and Romans had to say. Copernicus, however, had a knack for numbers and celestial curiosities, a combination that would later allow him to flip the astronomical script. With Uncle Lucas's support, he continued his studies in Italy, the Renaissance's bustling epicenter. This was a time when the Pope was more interested in commissioning art than excommunicating heretics. Talk about priorities, right? Myth-busting time. Copernicus wasn't some lone wolf gazing wistfully at the stars like a character out of a romantic novel. No, he was a part of an intellectual community, engaging with peers and professors who were all trying to make sense of a universe that stubbornly refused to revolve around them. It's easy to imagine him as a solitary genius, but reality was a tad more collaborative, even if the collaboration sometimes involved heated debates over whether or not the Earth moved. Spoiler. It does, but that's a revelation for another section. You might ask, why did any of this matter? Well, in a world where the Church held a monopoly on cosmic truths, any deviation was considered more scandalous than a cardinal caught with ink-stained fingers. And yet, that's precisely what makes Copernicus's early life so fascinating. He was quietly laying the groundwork for a seismic shift in thought, armed with nothing more than a quill and some ancient texts. The guy was about to suggest that the Earth wasn't the universe's VIP, and for a society that viewed itself as the celestial center, that was a mic-drop moment of epic proportions. So here we have young Nikolaus, not yet the revolutionary astronomer, but a promising student with access to the cutting-edge debates of his time. He was part of a world where ideas were starting to travel faster than a medieval gossip mill, thanks to the burgeoning Renaissance. He might not have known it then, but every theorem he studied, every debate he engaged in, was one step closer to the heliocentric model that would eventually earn him a permanent spot in the annals of history, and a few raised eyebrows from the Inquisition. In the end, Copernicus wasn't just a product of his environment, he was a disruptor in the truest sense. His early life wasn't defined by solitary nights beneath the stars, but by an education that challenged him to question everything, even if the answers were colder than a Polish winter. And that's just the beginning of his story. Now, let's fast forward to a young Nikolaus Copernicus, packed with ambition and a travel itinerary that would make any Renaissance scholar green with envy, or maybe just green with seasickness. We find him leaving the intellectual, if somewhat frosty, embrace of Krakow and setting his sights on Italy, the pulsating heart of Renaissance Europe. It was 1496, and if you were someone with a penchant for learning and a passport to burn, Italy was the place to be. Our man Copernicus wasn't just chasing stars, At this point, he was more interested in the legal codes and Hippocratic oaths. First stop, Bologna. It wasn't just any old university town. It was the university town, home to the alma mater of the educated elite since 1088. If universities were rock bands, Bologna was the Rolling Stones of the academic world. And in the late 15th century, Bologna's academic scene was as lively as its taverns. Here, Copernicus wasn't merely a tourist gawking at the architectural wonders. He enrolled to study canon law, a subject that, while not exactly the stuff of astronomical legends, was essential if you fancied a career with some ecclesiastical clout. And let's be honest, in those days, having the church on your resume was like having an Ivy League degree, only with more Latin and an extra dose of incense. But Bologna wasn't just about dusty legal tomes. It was here that Copernicus met Domenico Maria Novara, the university's leading astronomer. Imagine Novara as the cool professor who didn't just stick to the syllabus, but encouraged students to look beyond their textbooks, literally to the stars. Under Novara's mentorship, Copernicus began dabbling in astronomy, an academic side hustle that was more like a hobby at this point. Let's not mythologize him just yet. This was still a law student's equivalent of a weekend gardening project. With Bologna ticked off the list, Copernicus moved on to Padua in 1501, a city known for its medical school. If Bologna was the Harvard of canon law, Padua was the Johns Hopkins of Renaissance medicine. Here, Copernicus dived into the world of medicine, because who wouldn't want a side gig in medieval surgery to keep things interesting? Medicine in the 1500s wasn't exactly a science. It was more of an art form where try this and see if you survive was a legitimate treatment plan. The textbooks were expensive, with costs so high you might as well have been buying a small farm. And if you didn't have cash to spare, maybe you'd consider a kidney, although that was quite the barter system back then. But let's not kid ourselves. Medicine had a certain allure, a mix of prestige and mystery. For Copernicus, it was a chance to broaden his horizons beyond the theological and legal spheres. After all, a well-rounded education was the Renaissance equivalent of a Swiss army knife, indispensable and impressive at parties. By 1503, Copernicus had made his way to Ferrara, where he finally completed his doctorate in canon law. Ferrara was a cultured city, not quite Florence, but certainly a place where you could rub shoulders with the intellectual glitterati. Imagine a Renaissance Instagram, only with fewer selfies and more frescoes. This was the place where Copernicus could finally put the doctor in Dr. Copernicus, a title that would serve him well in ecclesiastical circles. But did it pay the bills? Not exactly. A law degree was more a ticket to respectability than riches. What's fascinating here is that while Copernicus was picking up degrees like they were going out of style, he wasn't yet the astronomy superstar we remember today. He was more of a Renaissance man, dabbling in various fields with a curiosity that refused to be pigeonholed. But let's pause to bust a myth. Copernicus wasn't a lone revolutionary from the get-go. He was very much a product of his environment, soaking up ideas like a sponge and collaborating with intellectuals across Europe. It's easy to imagine him as a solitary thinker, but the reality was far more social and a lot more caffeinated, thanks to the burgeoning coffee culture in Italy. In the grand tapestry of Copernicus's education, each city added a different thread. Bologna gave him a taste for the celestial, Padua honed his medical skills, and Ferrara polished his legal credentials. This educational tour de force wasn't just about collecting diplomas. It was about acquiring a worldview that transcended the narrow confines of any single discipline. And while the Renaissance glitterati might have been more interested in painting ceilings than pondering celestial mechanics, Copernicus was quietly setting the stage for his revolutionary ideas. As our scholarly traveller returned to Poland in 1503, he wasn't yet the Copernican revolution's poster child, but rather a well-rounded academic ready to apply his diverse skills. It's a reminder that sometimes the path to greatness is less about one defining moment and more about a series of seemingly unrelated choices. And while the Renaissance was a time that celebrated the genius of individuals, it was also an era where collaboration and cross-pollination of ideas were as crucial as any solo eureka moment. So, what's the takeaway? Well, if you're waiting for the spark of genius to strike like a Renaissance lightning bolt, you might be waiting for a while. Copernicus's journey teaches us that the road to innovation is often paved with diverse experiences, a dash of curiosity, and perhaps a few too many late-night debates over whether the Earth really does move. And that, dear listeners, is where we leave our intrepid scholar for now, on the cusp of a revolution he didn't even know he was starting. Returning to Poland in 1503, Copernicus was like someone who just completed the Renaissance version of a backpacking trip across Europe, loaded with experiences, slightly broke, but infinitely wiser. Back home, he slipped into the role of a canon at the Frombork Cathedral, courtesy of Uncle Lucas's connections. But let's not pretend this was a cushy gig with a corner office and a golden chalice. The annual income was modest at best, enough to keep bread on the table and ink in the quill, but not exactly a ticket to the high life. This was more about stability, a steady gig that allowed Copernicus the freedom to moonlight as a physician and economist on the side. Now, juggling multiple roles wasn't just a matter of personal ambition. It was economic necessity. Being a canon didn't come with the kind of perks you'd expect from modern clergy. No plush rectory or divine allowance. Instead, it was a day job that funded his nighttime passion, rewriting the cosmos. And here's where Copernicus's story takes a twist worthy of a plot from a Renaissance play. While the medieval world was still debating whether the Earth was the universe's preferred sunbathing spot, Copernicus was mulling over a model that would suggest otherwise. As a physician, Copernicus wasn't just handing out leeches and hoping for the best. He took the role seriously, even serving as a trusted medical advisor to his uncle, among others. And let's face it, in an era when medicine was more trial than triumph, having a doctor who didn't rely solely on divine intervention was a comforting thought. But perhaps his most intriguing side hustle was as an economist. Yep, you heard that right. Copernicus, the astronomer, was also something of a financial whiz. He pennied a treatise on currency reform titled Monety-Cudendi Ratio, which, let's be honest, won't win any awards for catchy titles, but was a serious proposal addressing inflation and currency debasement. It's like finding out Einstein moonlighted as a financial planner. Yet, while Copernicus was busy playing multi-hyphenate, he was also quietly working on a manuscript that would eventually upend centuries of astronomical thought. Enter De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium, a title that rolls off the tongue like a Latin tongue-twister. Copernicus's heliocentric model wasn't just a wild guess. It was a meticulously crafted argument backed by decades of observation and calculation. The Earth, contrary to popular belief, wasn't the be-all and end, all of celestial existence. It was just another planet orbiting the sun, a cosmic dance partner rather than the main act. Now, you'd think this would have caused an immediate uproar, right? Not quite. Here's the kicker. Copernicus was so apprehensive about the reaction to his work that he delayed its publication until the very end of his life. Talk about taking procrastination to the next level. Critics might have been as harsh as a Polish winter, or worse, the church could have handed him a one-way ticket to Heresy City. So, Copernicus played it safe, keeping his revolutionary ideas under wraps like a Renaissance Da Vinci Code. When De Revolutionibus finally hit the scene in 1543, the reception was about as lukewarm as a medieval bathhouse. It landed on the scientific community with the enthusiasm of a lead balloon. Copernicus's contemporaries weren't exactly lining up to see the Earth demoted from its celestial throne. Why? Well, for starters, the heliocentric model was mathematically complex and didn't offer immediate advantages over the geocentric system. It was like trying to convince people to switch to a new operating system that promised future benefits but required a steep learning curve. Moreover, the Church wasn't thrilled about the theological implications of a sun-centered universe. To them, it was like suggesting the Pope take up residence in a modest apartment instead of the Vatican. But to be fair, the Church's response was more of a cautious side-eye than outright condemnation at first. It wasn't until Galileo came along with his telescopic evidence that things really heated up, but that's a saga for another day. In a world where ideas moved slower than a medieval mule cart, Copernicus's work took time to gain traction. It wasn't until decades later that figures like Johannes Kepler and Galileo Galilei picked up the baton, adding their own observations and improvements to the heliocentric model. It's a testament to the enduring power of Copernicus's ideas that they eventually became the cornerstone of modern astronomy. But in his lifetime, the world was still catching up to the revolutionary notion that Earth wasn't the universe's VIP section. As we leave Copernicus for now, it's worth noting the irony of his legacy. The man who feared criticism so much that he delayed his magnum opus until his dying breath is now celebrated as a trailblazer who dared to challenge the status quo. It's a reminder that sometimes changing the world means having the courage to question it, even if your contemporaries greet your ideas with a collective shrug. Stay tuned, because the cosmic curtain has only just been raised, and the drama of the universe is far from over. And so, as Copernicus's ideas simmered quietly in the intellectual slow cooker that was 16th century Europe, the political and religious landscape was about to get more tangled than a bowl of medieval spaghetti. You see, back then, the Church wasn't just a spiritual guide. It was the cosmic bouncer deciding who got into the celestial club. And in a universe where everything revolved around the Earth, figuratively and literally, suggesting otherwise was like saying the Pope should trade in his papal tiara for a jester's hat. Now, let's talk timing. If Copernicus had been born a few centuries earlier, his heliocentric theory might have been treated like a passing cloud. Interesting, perhaps, but not worth a second glance. But the Renaissance was a time when folks were starting to question the old guard, and the printing press was cranking out books like the universe was going out of style. Ideas were spreading faster than a medieval plague, and Copernicus's theory, while initially met with a collective ecclesiastical shrug, was about to stir the pot. By the late 16th century, Copernicus's ideas had trickled down to a few daring souls, like Galileo Galilei and Johannes Kepler, who were more than willing to poke the ecclesiastical bear. Galileo, in particular, had a knack for seeing things, quite literally, thanks to his telescope. His observations gave the heliocentric model a much-needed credibility boost. But this was also where things got politically dicey. The Catholic Church, which had initially treated Copernicus's work like a curious footnote in the cosmic ledger, started seeing red flags. You see, the Church had long been the arbiter of cosmic truths, and they weren't too keen on having their celestial apple cart overturned. The idea of the Earth not being the universe's VIP room was more than just a scientific proposal. It was a theological grenade. The Church's initial shoulder shrug turned into a frown, and soon enough, a frown became a full-blown inquisition. By 1616, Copernicus' De Revolutionibus found itself on the Church's index of forbidden books. Talk about a delayed reaction, sort of like getting grounded for a prank you pulled back in high school. But why the slow burn? Well, for starters, Copernicus's work was more of a theoretical framework than an immediate challenge. It was like suggesting a new route to the new world when everyone was still figuring out how to sail without falling off the edge of the Earth. The heliocentric model, while revolutionary, was complex and didn't offer the kind of immediate, tangible benefits that would sway the masses or the clergy overnight. Plus, Copernicus's timing was as awkward as a Renaissance dance-off at a funeral. The Protestant Reformation was in full swing, and the Catholic Church was more concerned about Lutherans than lunar orbits. Economically, Europe was in the throes of change, too. This was the age of exploration, after all, when spices were worth more than gold and sea routes were the currency of empires. The Church was deeply entwined in these economic ventures, and a heliocentric universe didn't exactly fit into the neatly ordered world they were trying to maintain. The idea of the Earth as just another planet was like suggesting the King of Spain was just another guy with a crown, unthinkable and deeply unsettling. Yet, despite the Church's eventual crackdown, the seeds of Copernicus's ideas had already taken root. The heliocentric model was like a Renaissance bestseller, passed around in secret and debated in hushed tones in university halls. The printing press was the social media of the day, and once Copernicus's ideas were out there, they were impossible to contain. Sure, it took decades for them to catch on, but catch on they did, much to the Church's chagrin. One could say that Copernicus lacked the PR skills of a modern influencer. He was no Galileo, with his dramatic courtroom showdowns and telescopic revelations. Copernicus was more the quiet revolutionary, the kind of guy who'd rather let his work speak for itself. And in a world that demanded spectacle, his subdued approach was both his strength and his Achilles heel. It meant his ideas took longer to ferment in the public consciousness, but perhaps it was this slow, steady burn that ensured their durability. The political implications were just as seismic as the scientific ones. In a time when the Church's word was law, questioning its cosmological doctrines was akin to political treason. Monarchs and rulers, many of whom owed their thrones to divine right, were understandably jittery about a universe where God's favorite planet was suddenly just one of many. It was as if Copernicus had suggested that the divine right of kings was more about political convenience than celestial endorsement. So, here we are, watching as Copernicus's heliocentric model slowly but surely weaves its way into the fabric of scientific thought. It wasn't an overnight revolution, but rather a slow, methodical shift that challenged not just the understanding of the cosmos, but the very foundations of power and belief. The Church's initial indifference morphed into resistance, yet the sheer audacity of Copernicus's ideas ensured they couldn't be ignored forever. As we pause, consider this. Sometimes the most profound changes come not from those who shout the loudest, but from those who quietly persist. Copernicus didn't live to see the full impact of his work, but his legacy is a testament to the power of a single, daring idea. Keep your eyes on the cosmic horizon, because the story isn't over yet. The universe is just getting started with its revelations, and so are we. And so, Copernicus's celestial musings continue to echo through the corridors of history, proving that sometimes the quietest minds spark the loudest revolutions. Fast forward to the 17th century, and the seeds he planted began to sprout in the minds of astronomers who were itching to ruffle some ecclesiastical feathers. Enter Johannes Kepler and Galileo Galilei, two cosmic rabble-rousers who weren't afraid to jostle the status quo with a little celestial elbow grease. Kepler, with his penchant for celestial harmonics, took Copernicus's heliocentric model and added a tune of his own. While Copernicus had proposed a sun-centered universe, Kepler gave it rhythm and reason with his laws of planetary motion. Imagine a universe where planets danced in ellipses rather than perfect circles, a revelation that added mathematical rigor to what was once a theoretical leap of faith. In 1609, Kepler's Astronomia Nova hit the scene, proving that planets, much like bad drivers, didn't always stick to the speed limit. This wasn't just a mathematical curiosity. It was a seismic shift that explained planetary motion with the precision of a Swiss watch. While Kepler was crunching numbers like a Renaissance accountant, Galileo was busy peering through his telescope, catching moons of Jupiter that defied the Church's Earth-centric narrative. Galileo's observations, published in Sidereus Nuncius in 1610, were like cosmic fireworks that lit up the scientific night sky. The Church, predictably, wasn't thrilled. Galileo's celestial discoveries fueled the heliocentric fire, challenging the traditional geocentric model with the kind of evidence that couldn't be hand-waved away like yesterday's indulgence list. Now here's where things get interesting. While Copernicus had laid the groundwork, it took the boldness of Kepler and Galileo to incite a full-blown celestial rebellion. These guys weren't just standing on the shoulders of giants. They were climbing over them to get a better view of the universe. The heliocentric model was like a Renaissance Instagram post that finally went viral, despite the church's attempts to shadow ban it. But let's hit pause on the drama and take a moment to debunk the biggest myth of all, the image of Copernicus as a solitary genius, staring wistfully at the stars, untouched by the world around him. In reality, scientific progress was more of a team sport than a solo act. Copernicus wasn't a lone wolf howling into the void. He was part of a pack of intellectuals who were all sniffing around the same celestial trail. His correspondence with astronomers like Georg Joachim Rheticus and his reliance on existing astronomical tables show that collaboration was as much a part of his work as calculation. Rheticus, for instance, was instrumental in bringing Copernicus's ideas to a wider audience. Imagine him as the Renaissance equivalent of a hype man, spreading the word about Copernicus's groundbreaking ideas like a cosmic town crier. Without Rheticus's encouragement, De Revolutionibus might have remained a dusty manuscript gathering medieval cobwebs. And let's not forget the Ptolemaic system, the geocentric model that Copernicus built upon. While he challenged its conclusions, he relied on its data to craft his revolutionary thesis. It's a reminder that even the most groundbreaking ideas often stand on the foundations of those that came before them. So, how did Copernicus become the poster boy for the scientific revolution? Well, it's partly because his work embodied the spirit of a world on the cusp of change. The Renaissance was a time of questioning, exploring, and redefining boundaries, be they geographic, artistic, or celestial. Copernicus's heliocentric model wasn't just about planets orbiting the sun. It was a metaphor for the shifting tides of knowledge and power. It symbolized a world where inquiry was beginning to eclipse dogma, and where the cosmos was no longer a divine mystery, but a puzzle to be solved. Yet, it's important to remember that Copernicus didn't live to see himself hailed as a genius. During his lifetime, he was more like the guy at the party who suggests a new game, only to watch as everyone keeps playing charades. It wasn't until later, when the likes of Kepler and Galileo took up his ideas, that his work gained the recognition it deserved. By the time Isaac Newton came along in the late 17th century, Copernicus's heliocentric model was the established order, a testament to the enduring power of a revolutionary idea. In the grand tapestry of history, Copernicus's legacy is a reminder that change is often a collective endeavor. Scientific progress doesn't happen in isolated bursts of genius, but through the slow and steady accumulation of ideas, tested and retested by many minds. Copernicus wasn't a lone genius, but a crucial piece in the puzzle of scientific advancement, proving that even the quietest revolutions can have the loudest echoes. As we wrap up this cosmic journey, let's take a moment to reflect on the significance of Copernicus's work. His heliocentric model didn't just redefine our understanding of the universe. It challenged the very notion of human importance in the grand scheme of things. It was a humbling reminder that we are not the center of the universe, but part of a vast, interconnected cosmos. Copernicus's legacy is a testament to the power of curiosity and the courage to question long-held beliefs. It's a story of quiet perseverance, of ideas that transcend their time and place to reshape the world. So, as you drift off to sleep, ponder this. Sometimes, the most profound revolutions come not from those who shout the loudest, but from those who dare to question, to explore, and to dream. Copernicus may not have lived to see his ideas celebrated, but his legacy endures, a shining beacon in the night sky of scientific discovery. In the grand Game of Thrones that was ancient India, 323 BCE was a year of musical chairs with no music, and way too many chairs. Alexander the Great had just packed up his Macedonian circus and left the Indian subcontinent, leaving behind a power vacuum so gaping it could have sucked in all the peacocks in the region. Kings and regional rulers were practically tripping over their crowns, each trying to lay claim to a piece of the puzzle Alexander had hastily abandoned. It was a chaotic scene, akin to a royal Black Friday sale where everyone wanted a piece of the empire pie, and elbows were the currency of the day. Into this delightful mess stepped Chandragupta Maurya, a character who by all historical accounts was the kind of scrappy underdog Hollywood loves. The details about his early life are sketchy, but that's precisely what makes him fascinating. Think of him as the Rocky Balboa of ancient India, minus the boxing gloves and with a penchant for empire building. Chandragupta's rise was less about divine destiny and more about sheer grit and a bit of strategic guidance from one Chanakya, a brainy advisor whose sharp wit might have made Machiavelli look like an amateur blogger. Chanakya, also known as Kautilya, was a professor at Takshashila, an ancient university that would have given Hogwarts a run for its money in terms of prestige. He was the prototype of a political strategist, with a brain that could weigh options faster than a speeding chariot. Legend has it, he had a personal vendetta against the Nanda dynasty, which ruled a significant part of northern India. The Nandas were rich, powerful, and annoyingly smug about it. Chanakya's grudge was the kind of deep-seated vendetta that makes soap operas look tame. He needed a chess piece to play his Game of Thrones, and who better than Chandragupta, the ambitious young man with nothing to lose? So, what did Chanakya and Chandragupta do? They rallied an army, and not just any army. Chandragupta supposedly gathered a band of merry men, but instead of robbing the rich to feed the poor, they planned to overthrow an entire dynasty. It was a tall order, but Chandragupta was nothing if not audacious. This was the ancient version of a startup, and their business was empire building. They were the ancient disruptors, and their pitch was revolution. Now, let's talk brass tacks. The Mauryan Empire didn't just spring up overnight. It was built on strategic alliances, military maneuvers, and a fair bit of old-school conquest. Chandragupta's journey from an ambitious young leader to the Emperor of India wasn't a fairy tale, despite what some romantic accounts might suggest. It was brutal, calculated, and filled with the kind of gritty realities that don't make it into bedtime stories. The foundation of the Mauryan Empire was as much about brains as it was about brawn. Chandragupta and Chanakya leveraged the discontent among local rulers who were tired of the Nandas' heavy-handed rule. They promised change, a new order, and in a world where power was as transient as the monsoon rains, that promise had a seductive appeal. Imagine convincing enough people that you're the better tyrant to support. It took cunning, charisma, and probably more than a few threats. It wasn't all just strategy and subterfuge, though. The harsh reality was that establishing an empire involved battles, bloodshed, and not a little bit of luck. Historical records like those of the Greek historian Megasthenes, who later served as an ambassador to the Mauryan court, provide a peek into the empire's scale and organization. The Mauryan army, according to some records, numbered as many as 600,000 infantry, 30,000 cavalry, and 9,000 elephants. That's a pachyderm parade that could trample any opposition into submission. Once the Nandas were dethroned, Chandragupta didn't just sit back on his laurels, twiddling his thumbs. He expanded the empire further, ensuring it stretched from the Himalayas to the Deccan Plateau, and from Bengal to Afghanistan. Not bad for a guy who started out with nothing more than a dream and a determined advisor. The Mauryan Empire, at its peak, was a behemoth that changed the political landscape of India forever. Of course, the romanticized version of the empire's rise often glosses over the gritty details. Like any empire, the Mauryan establishment was built on the backs of countless labourers and soldiers, whose stories are lost to history. The administration was strict, with a bureaucracy that would have made any modern-day civil servant weep. But that's the price of progress, isn't it? The harsh reality behind the Mauryan success story is a reminder that the path to greatness is often paved with the sweat and toil of the many for the glory of the few. And thus, the Mauryan Empire was born amidst chaos and ambition, guided by the sharp mind of Chanakya and the indomitable spirit of Chandragupta. It was the first dynasty to unify most of India, a testament to what can be achieved with a bit of strategic genius and a lot of audacity. But as we marvel at their achievements, let's not forget the gritty, often brutal reality that lurked beneath the surface of this romanticized tale. If the rise of the Mauryan Empire was the stuff of legends, Its administration was the blueprint for all future empires to take notes from, though it's doubtful anyone was passing around copies at the time. Enter the Arthashastra, the ancient treatise that was less of a dusty old manuscript and more of a political playbook that would make Machiavelli's The Prince look like a self-help book for nice people. Written by Chanakya, this governance guide was the secret source behind the Marian administrative machine. Imagine an ancient version of the West Wing, combined with a survival guide for the ruthless statecraft of ancient India. The Arthashastra is a text that covered everything from espionage and military strategy to economics and the art of ruling. It was the Swiss army knife of governance. There was something for every situation. Chanakya's approach was pragmatic, and his treatise wasn't shy about broadcasting the Machiavellian moves needed to maintain power. This was realpolitik in its rawest form, folks. It was the kind of guide that makes you wonder if Chanakya ever smiled while plotting a particularly nefarious coup. Now, let's poke our noses into the Marian tax system, a financial leviathan that could make even the IRS tremble. The empire's coffers were filled by a complex web of taxes that would leave any modern accountant reaching for a stiff drink. Taxes were levied on everything from land and trade to professions and commodities. The land revenue system, or Baga, demanded that anywhere from 1/6 to 1/4 of the produce went to the state, depending on the fertility of the land and the mood of the local tax collector. If you think your tax return is complicated, try calculating your dues in a system where the variables included monsoon predictions and local customs. The Marian tax collectors were essentially the empire's rock stars, albeit ones who were more likely to take your goat than give you an autograph. They were part of a broader bureaucracy that was so extensive it could give any modern government a run for its money. The empire was divided into provinces, each overseen by a governor, with districts managed by a hierarchy of officials who ensured the empire ran as smoothly as a well-oiled chariot. But what did the Marians do with all that tax revenue? They built stuff, a lot of stuff. The Marian infrastructure projects were the empire's crowning achievement, setting the stage for centuries of economic prosperity. Roads crisscrossed the empire, connecting remote regions and facilitating trade. These weren't just dirt paths trodden by elephants. They were the ancient equivalent of the autobahn, minus the high-speed cars, but with plenty of ox carts and elephants. The roads were meticulously planned, with rest houses and wells dotting the routes, ensuring that even the most weary of travelers, or tax collectors, could find respite. And let's not forget the grand irrigation projects that transformed agriculture, turning the empire into a granary that fed millions. The Marians understood that controlling water was akin to controlling life itself. They constructed elaborate canals and reservoirs to harness the monsoon rains, ensuring that even in lean years, there was enough grain to keep the empire's stomach full. It was the kind of foresight that made sure the empire didn't collapse every time the rains decided to take a year off. The economic policies of the Marian Empire were equally groundbreaking. Chandragupta and Chanakya knew that for an empire to thrive, it needed more than just swords and soldiers. It needed trade and commerce. The empire actively promoted trade, both within its borders and with distant lands. Merchants were incentivized to move goods across the empire, creating a bustling network of trade routes that connected India to the riches of the West and the East. Ports on the western coast thrived, sending spices, textiles, and precious stones to the Mediterranean world, while silks and other luxuries made their way from China to the Indian markets. The Marian Empire, in its heyday, was a complex tapestry of governance, economy, and infrastructure, each thread intricately woven to support the other. The administration was nothing short of a bureaucratic marvel, a testament to the genius of Chanakya and the ambition of Chandragupta. It was an empire that understood the importance of a strong foundation, both literally and figuratively. Roads, taxes, trade, it all came together to form a civilization that was as robust as it was revolutionary. As with any historical narrative, the tales of the Marian Empire often gloss over the gritty realities. The romanticized stories of grand palaces and wise kings sometimes overshadow the less glamorous truths. The back-breaking labor of the citizens who built the empire's infrastructure, the heavy taxes that funded its ambitions, and the strict laws that kept the peace. Yet it's this blend of myth and reality that makes the story of the Marian Empire so compelling. It was a period of unprecedented growth and innovation, but also one of harsh realities and human toil. So here we are, at the heart of the Marian administration, unraveling the threads of an empire that was as much about strategic genius as it was about sheer willpower. The story doesn't end here, though. The Marian Empire has more tales to tell, more myths to debunk, and more realities to reveal. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the legacy of an empire that reshaped the course of Indian history, one cunning policy and one strategic maneuver at a time. And speaking of cunning policies and strategic maneuvers, let's dive into the saga of Ashoka, the Marian emperor who took the concept of a personal rebranding to a whole new level. If you've ever thought about turning over a new leaf, Ashoka's story might inspire you, or at least make you rethink your life choices. So, who was this Ashoka? Born around 304 BCE, Ashoka Maurya was the grandson of Chandragupta and the son of Bindusara. He wasn't exactly the heir apparent, but he wasn't about to let a little thing like birth order stop him. Legend has it that Ashoka's rise to power was anything but peaceful. His climb to the throne is said to have been a Game of Thrones-style family feud, minus the dragons, but with plenty of intrigue, and likely a few skeletons in the closet. Once Ashoka secured his place atop the Marian Empire, he set out to expand it with a fervor that would make even the most ambitious empire builders blush. Enter the Kalinga War, a conflict that would change the course of Ashoka's life and the history of India. In 261 BCE, Ashoka turned his attention to Kalinga, a thriving kingdom on the eastern coast of India. The reasons for this conquest were straightforward. Kalinga was a prosperous region with a strategic location for trade, and Ashoka wanted it. Simple, right? But the war was anything but. By all accounts, the Kalinga War was a bloodbath. The ancient text, Ashoka paints a gruesome picture, with over 100,000 soldiers and civilians dead and an equal number captured. If you're thinking that sounds like a nightmare, you're not alone. Ashoka himself was reportedly horrified by the carnage and suffering he had unleashed. It was a wake-up call that led to one of history's most dramatic transformations. Ashoka the Conqueror would become Ashoka the Compassionate. In the aftermath of the Kalinga War, Ashoka experienced what can only be described as an existential crisis. He was haunted by the devastation he had caused, and in a move that would make any PR strategist proud, he decided to pivot. Ashoka renounced violence and converted to Buddhism, embracing its principles of non-violence, compassion, and tolerance. This wasn't just a personal change, it was a public one too. Ashoka's conversion was a masterclass in ancient public relations, complete with rock edicts that served as stone-cold evidence of his transformation. These rock edicts, scattered across the Indian subcontinent, were Ashoka's way of broadcasting his new values to the masses. Think of them as ancient billboards, carved into stone rather than plastered on highways. These inscriptions were written in the local Prakrit language and various scripts, ensuring that Ashoka's messages reached as wide an audience as possible. His edicts spoke of moral and ethical governance, the importance of animal welfare, and religious tolerance. It's as if Ashoka went from wielding a sword to wielding a quill, using words instead of weapons to shape his empire. This transformation wasn't just a vanity project. It had real consequences for the Marian Empire. Ashoka's embrace of Buddhism led to a significant cultural shift. He promoted the construction of stupas, monasteries, and other Buddhist structures, turning the empire into a beacon of Buddhist thought and practice. His support for Buddhism helped spread the religion far and wide, reaching as far as modern-day Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. It was a cultural export that rivaled any trade goods, and Ashoka was its chief ambassador. Economically, Ashoka's new policies had a profound impact. His commitment to non-violence, meant that resources previously spent on military campaigns could be redirected to public welfare projects. Ashoka invested in infrastructure, building roads, hospitals, and rest houses. These initiatives improved the quality of life for his subjects and facilitated trade, ensuring that the empire continued to prosper even as it embraced a more peaceful path. Politically, Ashoka's reign marked a shift towards a more centralized and benevolent form of governance. His emphasis on ethical rule and justice resonated with his subjects, helping to solidify his legacy as one of India's greatest emperors. But let's not romanticize it too much. Ashoka's reign was not without its challenges and contradictions. Despite his peaceful intentions, maintaining control over such a vast empire required a firm hand. The bureaucracy remained extensive, and the administration was as complex as ever, proving that even the most well-intentioned rulers must navigate the murky waters of realpolitik. Ashoka's conversion also had a ripple effect on the social and religious landscape of the empire. His support for Buddhism elevated the religion to new heights, but it also created a delicate balance with the existing Hindu and Jain communities. Ashoka's edicts emphasized religious tolerance, advocating for mutual respect among different faiths. It was a progressive stance, but it also required careful diplomacy to maintain harmony within the diverse population of the Mauryan Empire. As the years rolled on, Ashoka's legacy grew, becoming a cornerstone of Indian history. His transformation from ruthless conqueror to benevolent ruler is a tale that continues to captivate historians and the public alike. It's a story that challenges us to reconsider the nature of power and the possibility of redemption, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. But as with any tale from the annals of history, Ashoka's story is a complex tapestry of myth and reality. While the romanticized version paints him as a saintly figure, the truth is undoubtedly more nuanced. Ashoka was a ruler who understood the power of image and storytelling, using it to reshape his legacy and the future of his empire. His reign was a testament to the idea that even the most hard-hearted of rulers can change, and that the pen, or in this case, the chisel, is mightier than the sword. So here's to Ashoka, the emperor who turned a nightmare into a narrative of hope and transformation. His story is a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a collection of human experiences, each with its own complexities and contradictions. As we continue to unravel the threads of the Mauryan Empire, let's keep in mind that the past is never as simple as it seems, and the truth is often found in the spaces between legend and reality. Ashoka's journey was far from over, and neither is our exploration of this fascinating period in history. Stay tuned, because the Mauryan saga has more revelations and reflections to offer. Ashoka's story might have wrapped up with a flourish, but the Mauryan Empire was far from done dazzling the ancient world. Picture an empire that wasn't content to just play in its own sandbox. The Mauryans were busy looking beyond their borders, eyeing distant lands with an ambition that could rival a reality TV star's quest for fame. We're talking about a time when international trade wasn't just a buzzword, it was the lifeblood of empires. And the Mauryans, they were right in the thick of it. First up, let's talk trade with the Greeks. This wasn't some casual exchange of olive oil for spices, it was a full-blown economic tango. After Alexander the Great's whirlwind tour of the East, the Seleucid Empire was born from the ashes of his conquests. The Mauryans and Seleucids were like two heavyweight champions eyeing each other from across the ring. But instead of going for the knockout, they opted for a little diplomatic dance. In 303 BCE, Chandragupta Maurya and Seleucus I Nikator, founder of the Seleucid Empire, decided to put their swords down and talk business. The result? A treaty that was more beneficial than a 2-for-1 sale on elephants. Seleucus ceded large swathes of territory to Chandragupta, including areas of what is now modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan. In exchange, the Mauryans sent 500 war elephants, the ancient equivalent of gifting someone a fleet of tanks, because who wouldn't want their own pachyderm power? But it wasn't all war elephants and territorial swaps. The treaty opened up trade routes that were as lucrative as they were long. The Marian Empire became a key player in the trade networks that stretched from the Mediterranean to China. Imagine silk, spices, and everything nice flowing through the arteries of the ancient world, with the Marians acting as the heart pumping life into these exchanges. Speaking of China, the Silk Road was a bit like the ancient world's version of Amazon Prime, minus the 2-day delivery, but with a lot more adventure. The Marians didn't just sit back and let the goods roll in. They actively participated in this ancient trade bonanza. Indian textiles, known for their vibrant colors and intricate designs, were highly sought after in foreign markets. And let's not forget the spices, because who doesn't want a little exotic flair in their cooking? The Marians were strategic about their trade, ensuring that their goods reached as far as the Roman Empire, where spices and silks were the height of luxury. Now, onto the political marriages and alliances of the era, the Tinder matches that made the Marian Empire swipe right. These weren't love stories destined for Hallmark movies. They were power plays, pure and simple. Marrying off a daughter wasn't about finding Prince Charming. It was about securing an alliance and ensuring the family business had some extra muscle. Chandragupta's marriage to the daughter of Seleucus Nicator is a prime example. It was a union that sealed their treaty and cemented a strategic partnership, proving that sometimes love and war do mix, at least in the political arena. The Marians were masters of the diplomatic hustle. They knew that in a world full of shifting alliances and power struggles, having a few friends in your corner was worth more than a well-armed army. Their interactions with the Greeks weren't just limited to the Seleucids. They also engaged with the Ptolemies of Egypt and other Hellenistic states, creating a web of alliances that ensured they weren't isolated on the international stage. It was a game of diplomacy that required careful maneuvering, and the Marians played it like seasoned pros. But what about the cultural zenith of the Marian Empire? Oh, buckle up, because this was a period when art and science weren't just hobbies. They were national pastimes. Under the patronage of the Marian rulers, especially Ashoka, the empire became a cultural powerhouse. Think grand stupas, intricate sculptures, and a flowering of literature that would inspire generations to come. The Marians weren't just building roads and trading goods. They were crafting a legacy that would outlast even their empire. The art of the Marian period was nothing short of revolutionary. The sandstone pillars erected by Ashoka, known as the Ashokan Edicts, were engraved with inscriptions that not only spread his messages of peace, but also showcased the era's artistic prowess. These pillars weren't just functional. They were masterpieces, standing as testaments to the skill and creativity of Marian artisans. The famous lion capital of Ashoka, which later became India's national emblem, is a prime example of the artistic zenith achieved during this time. Literature and science also saw significant advancements. The Arthashastra, attributed to Chanakya, wasn't just a political manual. It was a reflection of the intellectual climate of the time. The Marian court was a hub of scholarly activity, attracting thinkers and philosophers from across the known world. The intellectual exchanges with Greek scholars, facilitated by the diplomatic ties, enriched the empire's cultural tapestry, creating a melting pot of ideas and innovation. Science and technology weren't left behind, either. The Marians were pioneers in fields like metallurgy, with their ironwork being particularly advanced. The Iron Pillar of Delhi, a marvel of ancient engineering, stands as a rust-resistant testament to their metallurgical prowess. This wasn't just about creating shiny objects. It was about pushing the boundaries of what was technically possible. Economically, the cultural investments paid off in spades. The Marian Empire became a beacon of cultural exchange, attracting merchants, scholars, and travelers from far and wide. This influx of visitors didn't just bring wealth. It brought new ideas, fostering a spirit of innovation and creativity that permeated every aspect of Marian society. As we dig deeper into the Marian Empire's interactions with the wider world, it's clear that they weren't just passive players in the ancient geopolitical arena. They were active participants, shaping and being shaped by the intricate web of trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. The empire's legacy wasn't just in the territories it conquered or the wealth it amassed. It was in the bridges it built, both literal and metaphorical, that connected diverse peoples and cultures. So, as we stand on the cusp of the Marian Empire's zenith, let's remember that history isn't just a series of conquests and treaties. It's a vibrant tapestry woven with the threads of human ambition, creativity, and connection. The Marians didn't just leave behind ruins and relics. They left behind a story that continues to resonate, reminding us that in the grand dance of history, it's not just the steps that matter, but the rhythm and harmony that bring it all together. And just like that, we've only scratched the surface of the Marian Empire's grand narrative. There's still more to explore, more myths to debunk, and more realities to reveal. So stick around, because the saga of the Marian Empire is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as enthralling. Keep your time machines ready, history buffs, because the ride isn't over yet. The Marian Empire, a masterpiece of ambition and governance, now teetering on the edge of its final act. As we pivot from the zenith of Marian grandeur, it seems the only way is down, and boy, do they take a tumble. Picture a dynasty so vast and mighty, it could rival today's corporate empires. And yet, like all good things, it found itself facing the grim realities of an overstretched administration, internal dissension, and economic woes that would make a Wall Street crash look like a minor hiccup. Let's start with the internal strife, that age-old Achilles' heel of empires. After Ashoka's death in 232 BCE, the empire found itself caught in a succession of family feuds that could put any soap opera to shame. Ashoka's successors, lacking his vision and charisma, were more like placeholders than rulers, each one less competent than the last. Think of them as the photocopies of a once vibrant original, each one a little more faded, a little less defined. By the time you got to the last ruler, Brihadratha, you were left with a faint outline, struggling to keep the empire glued together. And what about the economy? Well, let's just say if empires had credit scores, the Marians would be in the red. Ashoka's generous welfare policies and massive public works, while admirable, drained the royal treasury faster than you can say economic downturn. The empire's revenue streams were drying up, with trade routes getting clogged and regional governors becoming more autonomous. Read. Rebellious. Taxes were hiked to compensate, and if you thought modern taxation was irritating, imagine paying up in a system where your dues could change with the whims of a local overlord. As the economy faltered, so did the loyalty of the provinces. The regional satrapies, once tightly held by Ashoka's administration, began to slip away like sand through a sieve. Governors started dreaming of independence, and without a strong central hand to keep them in line, the dream soon turned to reality. The empire began to fragment, and the Marians were left holding onto little more than nostalgia. And then there was the military, a once mighty force that had trampled its way to glory, now reduced to a shadow of its former self. Without funds to support its upkeep, the army dwindled in size and strength. Austerity measures saw fewer elephants marching to battle, and when your empire's strength is partly based on pachyderm power, that's a serious problem. Not to mention, a smaller army meant less ability to quash rebellions or defend against invaders. Enter Pushyamitra Sangha, the Brahmin commander-in-chief under the last Marian emperor, Brihadratha. A man with ambition as vast as the empire he served, Pushyamitra saw opportunity in chaos. In a coup d'etat that was as swift as it was decisive, he assassinated Brihadratha during a military parade. Because if you're going to stage a coup, you might as well do it with flair. And just like that, the curtain fell on the Mauryan dynasty, and the Sangha dynasty rose from its ashes around 185 BCE, ready to write its own chapter in the annals of history. Now, let's take a step back and scrutinize the myth versus reality of the Mauryan legacy. The romanticized accounts paint a picture of a golden age, a time of enlightenment and prosperity under Ashoka's benevolent rule. But peel back the layers, and you'll find a more nuanced tale. Yes, the Mauryan Empire was a trailblazer in governance and culture, but it was also a complex entity held together by a delicate balance of power and pragmatism. Ashoka's transformation from conqueror to compassionate ruler is inspiring, but it's also a reminder that even the most enlightened of leaders cannot escape the harsh realities of politics and economics. The truth is, the Marian Empire was a product of its time, shaped by the forces of ambition, conflict, and human endeavor. It was a tapestry woven with the threads of conquest and compassion, innovation and exploitation, unity and division. And as it unraveled, it left behind a legacy that would influence generations to come. Yet, despite its decline, the Marian Empire's impact on the Indian subcontinent and beyond is undeniable. Its administrative innovations, such as the concept of a centralized bureaucracy and standardized tax system, laid the groundwork for future empires. The cultural exchanges it facilitated enriched the Indian civilization, blending diverse ideas and traditions into a vibrant mosaic. The spread of Buddhism under Ashoka's patronage transformed the religious landscape of Asia, leaving a spiritual legacy that transcended borders. His edicts, etched in stone, continue to be studied and revered, offering insights into the values and ideals that shaped his reign. So, as we bid farewell to the Marian Empire, let's remember it for what it was: a complex, multifaceted entity that dared to dream big, stumbled, and ultimately fell, but not without leaving an indelible mark on history. It's a story that reminds us of the impermanence of power and the enduring nature of ideas. The Marians may have faded into the annals of time, but their legacy continues to echo through the ages, a testament to the heights of human ambition and the depths of its folly. And there you have it, folks, the rise and fall of India's first great dynasty, the Marian Empire. It was a saga of ambition and intellect, conquest and transformation, all wrapped up in a story that's as human as it is historic. So next time you ponder the twists and turns of history, remember the Marians, a dynasty that dared to dream, to innovate, and to leave a legacy that still sparks the imagination today. Until next time, history buffs, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep the past alive. The Achaemenid Empire's architects didn't just build with bricks and stones. They crafted a statement louder than the deafening silence of the desert. Picture this: a world where your front door is a 60-foot column, your living room is a 40,000 square foot terrace, and your neighbors are not just people, but entire nations. Welcome to Persepolis, the crown jewel of Persian ambition. It wasn't just about having a killer view of the Iranian Plat. It was a stone and mortar shout-out to the world that Persia wasn't just playing in the big leagues. It owned the stadium. Now let's get a sense of just how vast this empire was. At its peak around 500 BCE, the Achaemenid Empire stretched over 1 million square miles, from the Balkans and Eastern Europe to the Indus Valley. That's a lot of turf to cover, and what better way to flex imperial muscles than to build something big enough that even Zeus might think twice before messing with it. The Persians weren't shy about showing off their architectural chops, and why should they be? Persepolis was like the Instagram account of its day. Every column, relief and staircase, a post that screamed power, wealth, and a bit of don't mess with us attitude. Sure, modern skyscrapers might reach higher, but Persepolis had its own version of a skyscraper, the Apadana Palace. This was no ordinary conference room. Imagine entertaining guests in a hall with 72 columns, each standing 62 feet tall, topped with intricately carved bull capitals. It was like hosting a party in a forest of stone giants. But this wasn't just for show. Every detail was propaganda in limestone and marble. The carvings told stories of tribute from across the empire: gold, spices, textiles, each a reminder of the empire's vast reach and the wealth that flowed like the mighty Euphrates. And let's talk about the logistics for a second. You can't just pop down to the ancient equivalent of Home Depot to pick up materials for something like this. The stone came from quarries miles away. Artisans were recruited from various corners of the empire, and labor wasn't exactly unionized. Thousands of workers toiled under the relentless sun, sculpting, carving, and piecing together this monumental jigsaw. It was a colossal group project, and nobody wanted to be the one who forgot to bring their piece of the puzzle. The sheer scale of Persepolis was meant to dazzle and intimidate. It was a stage set for the grand opera of imperial power, where dignitaries from around the known world would come, stare in awe, and tacitly acknowledge Persian dominance. The very layout of the site was a psychological masterstroke. Visitors climbed a grand staircase, designed to impress with its symmetry and sheer size, leading them to the terrace, a vast, elevated platform that seemed to lift the empire itself above the mundane world. This was architecture as a tool of diplomacy, a demonstration of control over both nature and human ambition. But let's not get too swept away by the grandeur without acknowledging the flip side. For all its beauty, Persepolis was also a symbol of the empire's control over its subjects. Those tributes carved into stone weren't exactly voluntary donations. They were taxes extracted from the far-flung corners of the empire, reminders of the intricate web of control and the heavy burden shouldered by those who played their part in maintaining the imperial machine. The empire's grandeur was built on the backs of countless workers, artisans, and taxpayers, whose stories are largely lost to history. The Persian kings were nothing if not shrewd. They knew that soft power was as critical as military might. By investing in such architectural wonders, they were buying loyalty, or at least the appearance of it. When you walked through those halls, you were reminded of the empire's wealth and benevolence, and perhaps you'd think twice about rebellion when surrounded by such splendor. In a way, Persepolis was the ultimate PR campaign, a stone-cold reminder of who was in charge. And for those who might wonder if this was all just a vanity project, consider this. Alexander the Great, upon conquering Persepolis in 330 BCE, reportedly stood in awe of its magnificence before torching it in a drunken reverie. Even the great conqueror couldn't resist a little destructive admiration. Persepolis stood as both an epitome of Persian greatness and a poignant reminder of the transience of power. In the end, the architectural feats of the Achaemenid Empire were more than just grandiose public works. They were a testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and the complex tapestry of power dynamics that wove through the ancient world. A reminder that sometimes the most enduring stories are carved not just in stone, but in the ambitions and dreams of those who dared to reach for the sky, one column at a time. And speaking of reaching for the sky, let's take a detour from monumental stonework to the sprawling arteries of an empire, the Royal Road. This was Persia's grand answer to the age-old question: how do you keep the world's first superpower connected? Stretching a jaw-dropping 2,500 kilometers from Sardis in the west to Susa in the east, this thoroughfare made today's delivery giants look like they were running a relay race with snails. In a pre-GPS world, the Royal Road was the ancient equivalent of fiber-optic cables, speeding up communication and commerce across the empire. It was the internet highway of its day, minus the memes and cyber attacks. The Royal Road was no mere dusty track. It was meticulously maintained, with relay stations and rest stops strategically placed every 24 kilometers, where royal couriers could grab a fresh horse and some much-needed sustenance. These couriers, the Chaparkane, were the ancient world's FedEx, racing across the empire at breakneck speeds, ensuring the king's edicts arrived faster than your favorite cat video. Herodotus, the Greek historian and our go-to-gossip columnist for the ancient world, famously noted that neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night could stay these couriers from their appointed rounds, a line so catchy it stuck around for centuries. But this wasn't just about getting messages from point A to point B. The road was a lifeline for trade, with merchants and goods flowing along its length like lifeblood through the empire's veins. The economic implications were staggering. It linked diverse regions, allowing for the exchange of everything from fine textiles to exotic spices. It was a bustling corridor of commerce that made Persia a hub of economic activity, a veritable ancient Wall Street, minus the suits and dubious investment schemes. Now, let's not get too carried away with all this efficiency without acknowledging the flip side. The construction and maintenance of such infrastructure were monumental undertakings, demanding enormous resources and manpower. Think of it as the world's first mega-construction project, where thousands of laborers and specialists worked tirelessly to keep the empire's heart beating. This wasn't a utopian vision of benevolent oversight. It was an empire exerting its power to ensure its survival and prosperity. The romantic notion of a seamless, perfectly coordinated network often glosses over the harsh realities on the ground. The workforce behind these projects wasn't exactly lounging in ergonomic chairs with generous benefits packages. Many were conscripted laborers, pulled from the far reaches of the empire, a mosaic of ethnicities and languages, united by their compulsory contribution to the imperial machine. The romantic image of harmonious multicultural collaboration quickly fades when you consider the grueling conditions and the lack of personal agency these workers faced. The empire's grandeur was a double-edged sword, built on both ingenuity and the sweat of countless individuals whose names history has largely forgotten. And while we're at it, let's debunk another myth: the idea that the Persian kings were altruistic visionaries. Their investments in infrastructure were driven by cold, hard pragmatism. Roads, canals, and bridges weren't just about connecting people, they were about controlling them. The easier it was to move troops, collect taxes, and enforce the king's will, the stronger the empire became. Benevolence took a back seat to the relentless demands of empire building, where efficiency and control reigned supreme. But we can't deny the allure of the legend. The royal road, with its majestic scope and ambitious vision, has captivated imaginations for centuries. It was the backbone of an empire that dared to dream big, a testament to human ambition and the drive to connect and conquer. Yet behind the grandeur lies a complex tapestry of ambition, exploitation, and the unyielding march of progress. It's a story as old as time, one of power, control, and the indomitable spirit of those who dared to shape the world in their image. And so, as we marvel at the technical brilliance of ancient Persia, we're reminded of the intricate dance between dream and reality, legend and truth. It's a world where the past speaks to us not just through grand monuments and sweeping roads, but through the echoes of human ambition that still resonate today. As we continue our journey through the wonders of ancient Persia, let's keep our eyes open to the realities beneath the romance, the hard truths that shaped an empire, and the enduring legacy that continues to inspire and caution us in equal measure. Now, as we pivot from the roads that tied the empire together like a well-laced sandal, let's dive into the architectural eye candy that made ancient Persia not just a powerhouse, but a trendsetter. If Persepolis was the empire's LinkedIn profile, broadcasting power and prestige, then its architectural aesthetics were its Instagram feed, full of lavish, envy-inducing visuals. From the intricate columns to opulent palaces, Persian architecture was a feast for the eyes and a statement of imperial ambition. This was a world where form met function, and every stone told a story louder than a town crier with a megaphone. First up, those columns. The columns of Persepolis, or as I like to call them, the skyscrapers of antiquity. These weren't just your run-of-the-mill vertical supports. They were the architectural equivalent of a red carpet entrance. Each column was adorned with double-headed bulls or lions, the ancient version of a roaring success. The symbolism was as thick as the columns themselves. These beasts weren't just for show. They were signposts of power, guardians of the empire's secrets and strength. Picture the scene. Foreign dignitaries, diplomats, and traders craning their necks to take in the sight, all the while calculating exactly how much Persian influence they'd have to factor into their future plans. It's like the ancient version of power dressing, but with a lot more chiseling involved. But let's not get too wrapped up in the grandeur without acknowledging the artistry and obsession with detail that bordered on the obsessive. The Persians had a thing for patterns, geometric, floral, you name it. This wasn't just about making things pretty. It was a carefully curated aesthetic that spoke volumes about order, control, and the divine right to rule. The palaces, with their reliefs depicting scenes of royal life, weren't just for living, they were for storytelling. They were like ancient graphic novels carved into stone, narrating tales of kings who were part human, part demigod, and all business. Now, while the Persians were busy turning stone into stories, they were also cultivating what might be one of their most enduring architectural legacies, the Paradise Garden. These weren't just your average patches of greenery. They were meticulously designed oases that made today's manicured lawns look like amateur hour. Known as paradisa in Old Persian, a word that conveniently evolved into paradise, these gardens were the ultimate expression of order over chaos. Imagine perfectly aligned trees, water channels that sparkled in the sun, and the scent of exotic flowers wafting through the air. It was an Eden on earth, albeit one that required a small army of gardeners to maintain. But before we get too carried away by the floral fantasy, let's debunk a myth or two. The Paradise Gardens weren't just about aesthetics, they were about power. Water, as we all know, is life. And in the arid climate of Persia, controlling water was akin to controlling destiny. The gardens were a not-so-subtle reminder of the king's ability to tame nature itself, an oasis of tranquility in a politically turbulent landscape. So, while the myth of the Persian garden as a serene refuge is appealing, it glosses over the fact that these spaces were as much about displaying dominance as they were about horticultural harmony. Speaking of myths, let's tackle another one, the idea that Persian architecture was an isolated phenomenon. The truth is, Persian aesthetics were more contagious than a juicy piece of gossip. From Greece to India, Persian influence spread like wildfire, leaving its mark on everything from the grand halls of Athens to the intricate carvings of the Marian Empire. The Persians were the original cultural influencers, shaping architectural trends long before hashtags and viral content were even a glimmer in humanity's collective eye. Take the Ionic and Corinthian columns, for example. While the Greeks might have perfected them, it was the Persians who first dreamed up the idea of turning vertical supports into works of art. Their love for ornate detail was passed down like a treasured family recipe, inspiring the Greeks to add their own flourishes, and eventually leading to the architectural flourishes we now associate with the classical world. And don't even get me started on the use of gardens and water features in Mughal architecture. Persian influence was practically baked into every brick of the Taj Mahal. But let's be real. Not every architectural choice was a stroke of genius. The obsession with detail could sometimes veer into the realm of the excessive. You could argue that the Persians never met a surface they didn't want to embellish. Sometimes it seemed like they thought less is more was a phrase best left to the minimalist Spartans. Yet, for all their flourishes, the enduring appeal of Persian architecture lies in its blend of function and fantasy, a delicate dance between the practical and the poetic. So, as we stroll through the opulent halls and verdant gardens of ancient Persia, let's remember that behind every column, every relief, and every meticulously trimmed hedge lies a deeper story. A story of ambition, control, and a touch of vanity. The architectural marvels of Persia weren't just about creating a beautiful backdrop. They were about crafting a narrative, setting the stage for an empire that dreamed big and built even bigger. As we continue to unravel the intricate tapestry of Persian history, let's keep in mind that every stone and garden path is a testament to human ambition and the unyielding desire to leave a mark on the world. Just like the echo of a chisel against stone, the legacy of ancient Persia continues to resonate, reminding us that sometimes the past isn't quite as foreign as it seems. Stay tuned as we keep digging deeper into the wonders of this ancient civilization, where the stories are as rich as the architecture is grand. As we continue to wade through the lush gardens and towering columns of ancient Persia, it's time to delve into what really made this architectural wonderland tick. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just a passion for stone carving and floral arrangements. At the heart of Persian architecture lies a rich tapestry of political and cultural influences that transformed the empire into a veritable melting pot of ideas, styles, and yes, even tensions. First off, let's talk about the Persians' secret sauce, multiculturalism. You see, the Achaemenid emperors were less about building walls and more about building bridges, sometimes literally. With an empire that spanned everything from the Mediterranean to the Indus Valley, the Persians were like the ancient world's Arabs, offering a home to a plethora of cultures, each bringing its own flair to the architectural table. This wasn't just a happy accident. It was a strategic move to unify a patchwork quilt of peoples under one massive imperial banner. Now, why does this matter? Well, for starters, it meant that Persian architecture wasn't a static, monolithic beast. It was more like an ornate jigsaw puzzle, pieced together with influences from Egypt, Greece, Babylon, and beyond. Take the iconic column designs we all love to ogle, those majestic bull-headed capitals. They're a nod to the Mesopotamian ziggurats, and those intricate floral motifs that scream, "I'm fancy." You can thank the Egyptians for that dash of botanical bling, but don't get too swept up in the romantic notion of harmonious cultural fusion. Behind the scenes, it was less kumbaya and more Game of Thrones. The Persians were shrewd operators, and their architectural choices were as much about asserting control as they were about celebrating diversity. They skillfully borrowed and adapted, ensuring that each conquered culture saw a piece of itself in the empire's grand designs. It was a masterclass in soft power, where architecture became a subtle instrument of politics. To really get our heads around this, let's zoom in on the cultural melting pot that was Susa, one of the empire's capitals. This city was like the architectural equivalent of a mixtape, blending Elamite, Babylonian, and Persian styles into a harmonious, if somewhat tension-filled, whole. It was a place where you could find a Babylonian-style ziggurat chilling next to a Persian columned hall, all while flanked by Elamite sculptures. If you were a visitor, you'd probably spend half your time gawking and the other half trying to figure out which empire you were in. But here's the thing. This architectural mashup wasn't just for show. It was a clever bit of political theater. The Persians knew that by incorporating elements from each culture they ruled, they could foster a sense of inclusion and, more importantly, keep the peace. It was like saying, "Hey, we might have conquered you, but look, your favorite architectural style is right here in our capital. Isn't that nice?" It was psychological warfare with a side of decorative flair. Yet this wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach. Different regions had their own architectural quirks, and the Persians were happy to play along as long as the overall narrative of imperial unity was maintained. In Persepolis, for instance, you could see the hand of Greek artisans in the design of certain reliefs, while the use of mud brick in construction was a nod to the timeless traditions of Mesopotamia. This wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about creating a sense of continuity and stability across the empire, a feat that's a lot harder than it sounds when you're ruling over millions of people who speak dozens of different languages and worship a gaggle of different gods. Speaking of gods, let's not forget the role religion played in shaping these architectural marvels. The Persians were Zoroastrians, worshipping Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom. This belief system wasn't just a spiritual guide. It was an architectural muse. Fire temples, with their sacred flames, became focal points of Persian cities, designed to reflect the divine order and cosmic balance that Zoroastrianism preached. These temples were less about grandiosity and more about function, prioritizing simplicity over the ostentatious displays beloved by their neighbors. It was a religious statement etched in stone, a reminder that even the gods had a say in the empire's architectural choices. But let's not gloss over the tension between these various influences. The Persian Empire was a complex beast, and the architectural melding pot wasn't always a smooth ride. For every harmonious blend, there was a clash of styles that reflected deeper societal rifts. In some ways, the architecture served as a battleground for cultural supremacy, with each style vying for dominance, much like the political factions within the empire itself. And yet, there's something undeniably captivating about this architectural tug-of-war. It's a testament to the empire's ability to adapt and evolve, to take the best from each subject culture and weave it into a new, cohesive whole. It was a strategy born of necessity, a way to maintain control over a vast and diverse empire while ensuring that each conquered people felt a sense of belonging. It was a delicate balance, and one that required constant vigilance and a touch of Machiavellian cunning. So, as we marvel at the architectural wonders of ancient Persia, let's remember that behind every column and relief lies a story of political maneuvering and cultural exchange. It's a story of ambition and adaptation, of an empire that dared to dream big while keeping one eye firmly on the political realities of the day. It's a reminder that the past is never as simple as it seems, and that the architectural marvels we admire today were as much about power and control as they were about beauty and innovation. As we continue our journey through the wonders of ancient Persia, let's keep in mind that the true legacy of this empire lies not just in its grandiose structures, but in the stories of the people who built them, the cultures that influenced them, and the political games that shaped them. It's a story of ambition, power, and the unyielding drive to leave a mark on the world. A story that's still unfolding, even as we speak. Stay tuned for the next chapter in our exploration of this fascinating civilization, where we'll dive even deeper into the intricacies of Persian life and the architectural wonders that continue to captivate us today. And now, as our historical caravan rolls into modern times, let's tune in to the enduring echoes of ancient Persia's architectural symphony. You'd think after a few thousand years, those stones would have stopped whispering, but no, they're still playing the greatest hits on the world's cultural jukebox. Take a step into any contemporary city, and chances are you'll stumble upon something that owes a nod to ancient Persian flair. It's like the empire had an architectural afterlife, reincarnating in modern marvels from New York to New Delhi. First, let's talk about the Persian penchant for paradise gardens. In today's world, this isn't just about planting tulips in neat rows. We're talking urban oases like the High Line in Manhattan or the lush, sprawling parks of Tokyo. These green spaces are the modern echo of Persia's paradisa, where every well-placed tree and shimmering water feature is a nod to the ancient art of taming nature. It's an old-school lesson in landscaping, the perfect blend of serenity and a subtle flex of control. After all, nothing says, "I've got it together," quite like a perfectly manicured hedge. Meanwhile, the column game is still strong. While modern architects have traded their chisels for CAD software, the influence of those Persian columns is undeniable. Think of the Lincoln Memorial's Doric columns or the sleek minimalist pillars of contemporary office buildings. Sure, they might lack the roaring lion heads, but the DNA traces back to Persia's towering stone sentinels. These columns are the architectural equivalent of a power suit, timeless, unyielding, and designed to make you look up in awe. And let's not forget the lasting impact of Persian structural ingenuity. The ancient Persians were the original masters of the arch, a design that's still holding up everything from bridges to stadiums across the globe. It's like they handed us the architectural equivalent of a Swiss Army knife, versatile, reliable, and somehow always in style. The Roman Empire might have gotten all the applause for their architectural feats, but the Persians were the unsung heroes, laying the groundwork for arches that would support the weight of civilizations yet to rise. Now, let's dive into the economic ripples of this architectural legacy. Those grand structures weren't just eye candy, they were the economic engines of their time. Achaemenid innovations in infrastructure paved the way for trade routes that boosted commerce across continents. Fast forward to today, and that legacy of connectivity lives on in global trade networks and the bustling crossroads of modern cities. It's a reminder that good design isn't just about aesthetics. It's about creating systems that stand the test of time and keep the wheels of commerce turning faster than a Persian courier on the royal road. But let's not get too starry-eyed without acknowledging the ruins left behind. The skeletal remains of Persepolis, with its charred columns and crumbling walls, serve as a stark reminder of the fine line between triumph and overreach. It's the ghostly echo of a cautionary tale. Even the most splendid of empires can fall victim to the hubris of excess. Alexander the Great's fiery farewell to Persepolis wasn't just a drunken act of destruction. It was a sobering lesson in the transience of power. Those ruins are the ultimate historical Rorschach test, symbols of both human achievement and the inevitable decline that follows unchecked ambition. So, what does all this mean for us, the spectators in the grand theatre of history? It means that while we strut our stuff on the modern stage, we're still very much part of a never-ending cycle. The lessons of ancient Persia are as relevant today as they were when the first stone was set in Persepolis. The empire's architectural feats remind us that innovation is a double-edged sword. It can build bridges or burn them, depending on who's wielding the blade. In the end, the legacy of Persian architecture is a testament to the indomitable spirit of human creativity. It's a reminder that, while we may be separated by millennia, we're still connected by a shared desire to leave our mark on the world. Whether it's through a skyscraper that pierces the sky or a garden that offers respite from the urban jungle, the echoes of ancient Persia continue to shape the spaces we inhabit and the stories we tell. So as you wander through the streets of your city, take a moment to look around. Chances are you'll find a little piece of Persia peeking through the modern facade, a subtle nod from history that even in the relentless march of progress, some things never change. It's the ultimate architectural encore, a reminder that while empires rise and fall, the quest for beauty and meaning endures. And as history has shown us time and again, that's one encore that never gets old.